Homer Simpson, the man behind the stumble. Close your eyes for a moment, if you haven't already. Picture a couch. An orange couch, a little worn at the armrests, slightly sunken in the middle in the specific way that furniture sinks when the same person has been sitting in the same spot for a very long time. The cushions have memorized their owner. In a house that is slightly too small for everything it contains, with a television on and the light from the screen flickering gently across the walls, and on that couch sinking into the middle cushion like he has been there for 30 years, because in some sense, sits Homer Simpson. He is asleep before the credits finish rolling. And most of us, when we imagine Homer, stop right there. We see the belly, the bald head with its ring of brown hair, the 5 o'clock shadow that never quite turns into a beard. We see the eyes that go wide with panic or glaze over with contentment. We hear the sound he makes, that long, gasping expression of shock or despair, or the specific joy of discovering that the refrigerator still has beer in it. We picture the donut. We picture the beer. We picture the way he says his son's name, stretched long and rising into something that sounds more like a sound effect than a word. And then we laugh, because Homer is funny. He has always been funny. But there is something else in Homer Simpson, something the writers built over decades and then occasionally, in the quietest episodes, allowed to rise to the surface. Something that makes the comedy ache a little. If you watch closely enough, the jokes are real and the laughter is real and the donut falling into the reactor core is real in the way that cartoon physics is real. But underneath all of it, underneath 36 seasons of pratfalls and misadventures, and the particular genius of a man who manages to be consistently wrong in ways that somehow come out right underneath all of that, is a portrait. A careful, loving, honest portrait of a specific kind of man. A man who is trying, in the only ways available to him, to hold on to the things he loves. Tonight, we are going to look at that portrait closely. Homer J. Simpson was born on May 12th, though the show has played fast and loose with this, as it does with almost everything. The floating timeline eventually dissolving even the certainty of a birthday into something that feels approximate rather than fixed to Abraham Simpson and Mona Simpson, in a household that was never quite stable. His father, Abe, was a man who wore his disappointments loudly and his affections quietly, if at all. Abe was not a cruel man. He was not a villain. He was simply someone who had been shaped by an era that did not reward tenderness in fathers, that treated emotional expression as a kind of weakness, and who passed that shaping along without meaning to, the way these things so often travel, not as a choice but as a default, as the water you swim in, until you do not notice the water anymore. His mother Mona was different. Mona Simpson, voiced in her appearances by Glenn Close, which tells you something about the weight the show placed on her, because you do not cast Glenn Close for a throwaway role, was a woman of intelligence and conviction. She had been a part of a political movement in the late 1960s, had found herself one night making choices that could not be unmade, and one night she had been forced to flee, to leave her family, to leave her son. Homer was very young when she disappeared. The show gave us that story slowly, carefully across years. It did not rush to it. It let the absence accumulate, first let you understand Homer as a man shaped by something missing, before it told you what the something was. And what it revealed, when it finally told you, was not a simple portrait of abandonment. Mona had not wanted to leave. She had not chosen her cause over her child in some cold and calculated way, had not weighed the options on a balance and decided that the political was worth more than the personal. She had been swept up in something larger than herself, and the consequences had arrived faster than she could stop them, and by the time the dust settled, she was gone and Homer was standing in a house that now had one less person in it than it should have. He never really talked about it, at least, not directly. Instead, Homer Simpson ate. He ate with a focus and a joy that was almost spiritual, the enormous sandwich held with both hands and regarded with an expression of reverence that the show plays for laughs, but that contains, if you look past the joke, something recognizable. The towering pile of donuts. The absolute reverence with which he approached a well-cooked piece of meat. The late-night raids on the refrigerator that the show depicts with the atmosphere of a man returning to something he needs rather than simply something he wants. Underneath the comedy, if you were willing to look, was something very recognizable. Eating as comfort. Eating as a way of filling something. Eating as the one pleasure that had been consistently available to a child who was otherwise navigating a home that felt incomplete. Food did not leave. Food did not have a political cause that made it dangerous to know. Food was just there, and Homer reached for it again and again, across 3 decades of episodes, with the enthusiasm of someone who has learned not to trust the things he loves most to stay. The donut is always available. The beer is always cold. These are things that can be counted on. People, in Homer's experience, are harder to count on, but he keeps trying. There is an episode, season 12, titled HOMR, that stands as one of the most quietly devastating pieces of character writing the show ever produced. In it, Homer participates in a medical study and discovers, through an X-ray, that there is a crayon lodged in his brain. A single red crayon, jammed up into the frontal lobe during childhood, physically reducing his cognitive function in ways the show had been hinting at for years. The crayon is real, the damage is real, and when the crayon is removed, Homer becomes smarter. Not just a little smarter, genuinely, measurably, profoundly intelligent. He begins to understand things he had never understood before. He connects ideas that his regular mind would never link together. He sees the world with a clarity that has, until now, been unavailable to him. And he is miserable. The intelligence isolates him. His coworkers don't understand him anymore. His neighbors look at him with suspicion rather than the fond tolerance they had extended to the less capable version. The social warmth that had made him, despite everything, despite the disasters and the failures and the decades of inadvertent chaos, a beloved figure in his community begins to evaporate. Because Homer's charm had always lived somewhere adjacent to his limitations. His enthusiasm, his stumbling sincerity. The way he could be completely wrong about something and still manage to make the people around him feel seen, feel heard, feel like the room was better for his presence in it. Smart Homer was correct more often. Smart Homer was also alone. And in the end, Homer chooses to have the crayon put back. It is played partly for laughs. Of course it is. This is The Simpsons, and the show has never been comfortable sitting in pure tragedy for too long. But there is a moment, just before the procedure, where Homer writes a letter to Lisa. He knows what he is about to give up. He knows that the version of himself that understood the world clearly, that could follow her arguments and appreciate her intelligence and meet her where she lives, is going to go back to sleep. And he writes to her anyway, in full knowledge of what he is choosing, telling her that even if he can't always follow what she's saying, he is proud of her, that he knows she is brilliant, that he sees her. He chooses warmth over clarity. He chooses the fog, because the fog is where his family is. That is not a stupid choice. That is, in many ways, one of the most considered choices a person can make. It is the choice of someone who has understood, through the brief and agonizing window of his enhanced intelligence, what the life he is returning to actually means, and has decided that it is worth returning to even knowing what it costs him. Homer's relationship with his daughter Lisa is perhaps the most emotionally complex thread in the entire series, and it runs beneath everything else like a current you can feel without always being able to see. Lisa is everything Homer is not: articulate, driven, curious, politically aware, sensitive to beauty and injustice in equal measure. She plays the saxophone with genuine talent and genuine feeling. She reads books that Homer couldn't follow even with the crayon removed, argues positions with a precision and a conviction that the school and the town and most of the world around her is not equipped to engage with. She carries a moral seriousness that sometimes makes her exhausting to be around, and the show is honest about that too. Does not paper over the ways that Lisa's gift for seeing clearly can make her difficult to live with. Homer loves her completely. He doesn't always understand her. He occasionally says the wrong thing, sometimes the worst possible thing, with a cheerfulness that makes it somehow worse and somehow better at the same time worse because the carelessness of it is genuine, better because the absence of malice is also genuine, and genuine absence of malice is rarer than it sounds. But his love for Lisa is not conditional on understanding her. It is not contingent on her being easier, on her filing down the edges that make her unusual, on her performing a version of herself that fits more comfortably into the Homer-shaped world of the house on Evergreen Terrace. The love persists through every misunderstanding and every moment of mutual bafflement, and that persistence is its own kind of intelligence. A different kind from Lisa's, but not less real. His relationship with Marge is the one the show returns to with the most consistency and the most confidence, the relationship the show believes in most completely, the one it treats as the load-bearing wall of the whole structure. Marge and Homer should not work. The compatibility analysis would be brutal. She is organized where he is chaotic. She is patient where he tests patience. She maintains where he depletes. She plans where he stumbles. And yet, what holds them together is not compatibility. It is recognition. It is the specific, rare quality of being known by another person, not known in the sense of having your habits cataloged or your preferences memorized, but known in the deeper sense of being seen without the armor, understood without the explanation, loved without the negotiation. Marge knows who Homer is at the cellular level, and she chooses him anyway. Homer knows who Marge is through the fog and the distraction and the decades of not quite paying attention, and he comes home to her every night. He comes home. This is the fact the show returns to more than any other. Whatever else happens in an episode, the disaster, the scheme, the impossible situation that somehow resolves before the credits, Homer comes home. He comes through the door of the house on Evergreen Terrace, and the family is there, the same as it was before, slightly worn and slightly imperfect, and entirely his. He does not take this for granted. He could not articulate, in words that would satisfy a questioner, what it means to him. But the body knows. Every time he comes through that door, the body knows. The commute itself is worth a thought. Every morning, or most mornings, the show's flexible relationship with Homer's attendance record is itself a kind of running character note. Homer drives to work. He drives through Springfield in a car that has seen better decades, passing the familiar landmarks of the town that has been the backdrop of his entire adult life. He arrives at the plant, he badges in. He takes the elevator to Sector 7G and sits down in front of a panel of controls that has, over the years, accumulated the domestic detritus of a man who makes wherever he is a little more like home. The coffee, the snacks, the small radio. The safety implications of this workspace arrangement are enormous, and the show knows this and uses it. But what the workplace also communicates, beyond the joke, is something about Homer's relationship to his own comfort. He carries it with him. He builds it wherever he lands. His friendship with Moe Szyslak is the show's quietest, sustained male friendship, running beneath the more visible camaraderie of Lenny and Carl. Moe is not a good person in any simple sense. He is envious, dishonest, prone to depression that surfaces as hostility, occasionally quite dark in the ways he talks about his own life and his own prospects. But he has been Homer's bartender and sometime friend for 3 decades, and the show has given them moments of genuine warmth between the comedy and the friction. Moe, in his way and despite everything, cares about Homer. He would not say so. But the care is there, steady and unspoken, in the way that care sometimes lives in people who have not been given the tools to express it directly. Lenny Leonard and Carl Carlson are the furniture of Homer's working life, so present and so consistent that it is easy to overlook how much they mean to him. They have been beside each other at the plant for as long as anyone can remember, and their 3-way friendship with Homer has the specific warmth of relationships built not through choice or compatibility, but through shared time, through the accumulation of enough shared moments that the relationship becomes its own kind of home. Homer does not question any of this. He accepts it as he accepts most good things, with a straightforward delight that does not complicate itself by examining whether it deserves to be there. This is one of his most unusual and most valuable qualities. He receives love without suspicion. He experiences joy without the background noise of anxiety about when the joy will end. He is, in this sense, genuinely open to his own life in a way that many people, smarter and more defended people, are not. When Homer becomes intelligent, when the fog lifts and the words come easily, and the connections between ideas form with speed, his first instinct is not to celebrate himself. It is to share it. He reaches for Lisa. He calls her. He tries to meet her in the world she has always inhabited alone. And the reconnection between them, in those days of enhanced intelligence, is one of the most quietly devastating stretches in the series. Because you can see, watching it, what it costs Lisa. Not the intellectual companionship, that part is wonderful. A genuine relief, the first time she has been met by her father in the language she actually speaks. What it costs her is the knowledge that this is temporary. That the father who can see her now will soon choose to stop seeing her, not out of cruelty or indifference. Out of the simpler and more heartbreaking fact that being able to see the world clearly is not, in Springfield, a comfortable state to maintain. Homer chooses the fog. He chooses to go back to not quite understanding, to the warm, soft focus version of his life that the crayon makes possible. And in choosing it, he is also choosing the version of his relationship with Lisa that works within those limitations. He is choosing the love that he can sustain over the clarity that he cannot. And yet, the choice is not abandonment. The letter he writes to her before the crayon goes back in says everything. It says, "I see you. I see who you are. And the version of me that will forget how to follow your arguments still loves the person behind them." The fog does not touch that. He goes back to sleep in the way that he has always been slightly asleep, and Lisa plays her saxophone in her room. And the house on Evergreen Terrace continues, imperfect and warm, and exactly what it has always been. A place where love persists even when understanding does not. Where the fog is real and the love is also real. Where a man who cannot always see clearly still manages, somehow, to find his way home. That is the deepest truth about Homer Simpson. He is a man for whom love is the only thing that does not require intelligence. It lives somewhere past thought, past comprehension, past the crayon and the radiation and the years of managed fog. It is the thing in him that is fully awake. Homer stumbles through Springfield, he crashes and recovers. He sleeps deeply on the orange couch and wakes up with the same eagerness he went to bed with, ready for whatever the next disaster will be, never quite learning the lessons that disasters are supposed to teach, and somehow, in that stubborn amnesia, continuing to be exactly who he is. The couch keeps his shape, the television flickers on. The family assembles, imperfect and warm, and the evening begins. That is not a failure. That is a life, held together by the one thing that actually holds anything together. The stubborn, improbable, slightly ridiculous decision to keep showing up for the people you love. Homer Simpson makes that decision every day. He just makes it with a donut in his hand. If you're still with us, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. And if slow, story-driven content is what your nights have been missing, the subscribe button is right there. Now, let's keep going. Marge Simpson, the quiet foundation. There is a particular kind of woman who holds a household together so seamlessly that the holding together becomes invisible. The dishes appear clean. The appointments are remembered. The bills are paid on time, or close enough to on time that the difference is never catastrophic. The children are dressed, the refrigerator is stocked, and when the front door opens after school or work or another one of those days that somehow went sideways before noon, there is a dinner on the stove and a presence in the kitchen that makes the whole house feel inhabited rather than merely occupied. Someone is home. Someone has been attending to things. The evidence of that attendance is everywhere, in the neatly stacked mail and the washed dishes, and the child who has been reminded of their homework before you had to say anything. Marge Simpson is that woman. And the show, to its credit, has never entirely let her be only that. Marjorie Jacqueline Bouvier was born into a family that was, on the surface, perfectly ordinary. Her father, Clancy Bouvier, was a flight attendant who carried himself with the particular dignity of someone who has decided that his job is more glamorous than the world seems willing to acknowledge, who wore his uniform as a kind of armor and inhabited his professional role with more investment than his domestic one. Her mother, Jacqueline, was a woman of strong opinions held quietly, which is its own specific kind of power, the power of someone who has learned to work within a system rather than against it, who has found that the indirect path is often more effective than the direct one. Her sisters Patty and Selma became two of the most distinctly realized side characters in the show's history, which is saying something given the extraordinary density of Springfield's supporting cast. Marge grew up in a house where things were managed, where feelings were not necessarily discussed but were worked around, accommodated, anticipated, where the surface of a day mattered and was maintained, not out of pretension, but out of a genuine belief that a well-kept surface is itself a form of care, that the made bed and the clean kitchen communicate something to the people who live in the space, say something about what they are worth and how seriously their comfort is taken. She absorbed this belief before she had words for it. She carried it into the house on Evergreen Terrace, where it functions as both her greatest gift to the family and the invisible tax she pays for living there. The pearls are always there. In every episode, in every scene, even in moments of crisis and chaos that would logically require the removal of jewelry, the pearls are around Marge Simpson's neck. They have become so fundamental to the visual vocabulary of the character that they function less as an accessory than as a part of her. Like the blue hair, which defies several laws of biology and physics in its height and rigidity and perfect geometric ascent, never wilting, never shifting, maintained through the decades with a fidelity to its own form that is almost eerie. Like the apron, which appears and disappears depending on whether she is in the kitchen, but which the viewer's mental image of Marge always includes. These are the elements of a costume. But Marge is not wearing a costume. She is wearing herself. The pearls are not decoration. They are the outward form of a self-presentation that she has maintained across 3 decades, and the maintenance is part of the meaning. She chooses, every day, to look like someone who has herself together, to present to Springfield, to her family, to the mirror in the morning, a version of Marge Simpson that is organized and composed and dressed in a way that suggests the interior matches the exterior. The interior does not always match. The gambling episode is the one where the show most explicitly pulls back the composed exterior and looks at what lives underneath. Marge develops a compulsive gambling habit. It begins at the casino that opens in Springfield and escalates with a speed that is alarming precisely because it is so recognizable, the progression of a person finding, for the first time, something that fills a gap they had stopped noticing was there. The structure of the addiction, the relief it provides, the way it fills a specific and never previously identified gap, the progressive loss of control, the morning after shame and the afternoon after return is depicted with an accuracy that the show does not always bring to its more serious subjects. What the gambling does for Marge is give her something that is entirely hers. Not Homer's problem, not Bart's crisis, not Lisa's cause or Maggie's needs, or the household's requirement for management. The gambling is Marge's, and the private nature of it, the thing that happens in a space where she is not managing anything for anyone, is a significant part of its appeal. At the casino, she is anonymous in the best sense. She is not Homer's wife, or the children's mother, or Patty and Selma's more functional sister. She is a woman at a machine, making choices that belong only to her, existing in a space where the stakes are contained and the outcome is immediate rather than spread across years of daily effort and incremental investment. This is what Marge needs, the gambling makes clear. Not gambling specifically, gambling is simply what was available when the need became loud enough to hear. What she needs is what the painting is for, and what the cooking is not. A space of pure self-expression that exists without obligation to anyone else's comfort or satisfaction. Her painting is perhaps the most telling detail in the whole portrait of Marge Simpson. In the episode Brush with Greatness, Marge discovers a talent she had put away, literally stored in the attic, physically out of reach, out of sight since before her marriage. She had been a genuinely gifted artist. Not in the hobbyist sense, not in the way that people say, "Oh, she's so creative about someone who makes nice curtains and takes a watercolor class once a month." In the serious sense. She had vision. She had a distinctive eye. She had painted something that made a young Ringo Starr, of all people, feel truly seen, not flattered, not documented, but seen, and she had tucked that ability away when the demands of her life made the space for it impossible to find. When she takes it back up, the show is careful not to turn her rediscovery into a tidy triumph. The episode ends well enough, but what it leaves behind is a question the show will return to again and again, in different forms, across years. What has Marge given up, and was the giving up a sacrifice or a choice? And is there even a meaningful difference between those two things, when the choice was made under the pressure of circumstance, rather than in a moment of freedom? The answer the show seems to arrive at, slowly and without proclamation, is that Marge herself is not entirely sure. She loves her family without reservation. She would not trade the life she has built for the life she might have had. But the painting is still up there in the attic, and the fact that it is up there rather than on the walls or in a studio says something that Marge does not say directly, has perhaps not fully said to herself. Her relationship with Homer is the emotional center of the show, even more than the individual characters might suggest, because these two people should not work. On paper, the marriage between the neurotic, competent, beauty school dream-deferred Marge Bouvier and the disaster-prone, crayon-brained, beer-forward Homer Simpson should have collapsed before Bart was born. Every couples counselor in Springfield and the show has visited several would say the same thing. The incompatibility is structural. The communication styles are not simply different but occasionally perpendicular. The values, while not contradictory, are expressed through such different languages that translation is perpetually required. And yet, what holds them together is not compatibility. It is a recognition that runs in both directions. Marge sees Homer with clear eyes and chooses him anyway, and Homer sees Marge with adoring eyes that are, in their own way, equally clear. He knows he is lucky. He knows, with a certainty that his forgetful and distracted mind somehow never loses hold of, that Marge is the best thing that has happened to him, that the house on Evergreen Terrace, which he has driven a car into at least once, is home because she is in it. This knowledge lives in Homer below the level of articulation, in the body rather than the mind, in the way he reaches for her hand in the dark, and the way he looks at her when she is not looking back. And Marge, who has spent a lifetime making sure things work, has found in Homer something she did not know she needed. Someone whose love for her is so uncomplicated and so complete that it asks nothing of her managing. He doesn't need her to be a certain kind of person. He doesn't need her to be impressive or composed or to keep the surface smooth. He just needs her to be there, close enough to reach. That is a rare thing to be given. Her sisters Patty and Selma are her shadow lives, made flesh. They have the independence that Marge gave up when she married Homer, the careers, the apartment of their own, the shared passion for MacGyver and cigarettes, and the particular pleasures of mutual disdain for a world that has not given them what they deserved. They are, in their way, free, and they are profoundly lonely. Not miserable, the show never lets them be simply miserable, gives them their own comedy and their own dignity and the genuine warmth of their bond with each other. But they ache for connection in a way that the freedom has not resolved. They go on dates that end in disaster. They hold Marge's life at arm's length, as though it is something they could have had but were too smart to choose. Marge watches her sisters and sees a version of herself that was possible. Her sisters watch Marge and see a version of themselves that they dismissed. Nobody says any of this directly. The feeling moves beneath the surface of every scene they share. Marge's anxiety is worth sitting with because the show has been more consistent about it than about many character traits, and more honest about its dual nature than most shows would be. She worries. She worries about Homer, which is essentially a full-time second job given his track record. She worries about Bart, who provides fresh material for anxiety with reliable frequency. She worries about Lisa, not because Lisa needs the worry, but because Marge has internalized the anxiety of having an unusual child in a town that is not always kind to the unusual. She worries about Maggie in the way that parents of very young children worry about someone they cannot yet protect through negotiation only through presence. The worry is also a form of love. This is not an excuse for it or a defense of anxiety as a coping strategy. It is simply accurate. The two things, the love and the worry, arrive in Marge in the same package and cannot be fully separated, because caring about people means attending to the ways they might be hurt. Marge attends with a thoroughness that is both her greatest strength and her most consistent source of exhaustion. She does not attend to herself with the same thoroughness. This is the gap in her self-care, that the painting and the gambling and the occasional episode of genuine breakdown illuminate the woman who tends to everyone else so attentively that she has developed a systematic blind spot for her own interior. The moments when Marge's composure breaks down are among the show's most instructive. Not because the breakdown is cathartic or resolved or leads somewhere useful. Often it is not cathartic, not resolved, does not lead anywhere useful at all. It is simply Marge telling the people around her that the work of being her is sometimes heavier than it looks. And the people around her, when she does this, are not always adequate to the moment. Homer, with the best intentions, sometimes makes it worse. The children, who are children, receive the information and file it in the category of things that are confusing about adults. But she was heard. In the moment, she was heard. She picks up the apron. She goes back to the kitchen. The dinner will not make itself. And the pearls are still there, exactly where she put them. The painting is still there too. She knows the way to the attic. She could go back up. She might. Tomorrow, or the week after, or in the spring when the light is right, and the children are at school, and Homer is at work, and the house is quiet in a way that is different from the regular quiet Fuller somehow, more potential, more like the silence that painting requires. She might go up. She knows the way. Bart Simpson, the rebel with every reason, In the beginning, before the show had found its emotional register, before the writers had fully understood what they were building, Bart Simpson was the point. He was the merchandise. He was the t-shirt. He was the phrase on the bumper sticker and the plastic figurine on the dashboard, and the reason school principals across America wrote letters home to parents, warning them about the corrupting influence of a cartoon 10-year-old who did not respect authority and seemed proud of. This. He was the catchphrase. He was the attitude. He was the squirt of pure defiance in a cultural moment that found itself hungry for it. And he served that hunger with the cheerful efficiency of a character who had been designed at the molecular level to be difficult to contain. Don't have a cow, man. Eat my shorts. The bleached, blonde kid on the skateboard, coasting through the opening credits with a grin that managed to be both genuinely annoying and genuinely infectious, doing whatever the afternoon required, which was generally the opposite of whatever the adults around him required. Bart was, for a cultural moment at the end of the 1980s and the very beginning of the 1990s, the most talked about character on television. And then the show became something more than its most marketable element. Lisa grew more vivid, Homer deepened. The emotional architecture of the show developed in ways that the early Bart-ass product could not have anticipated. And the show had to figure out what was underneath the grin, what was beneath the act, why a 10-year-old boy with a decent home and a mother who loved him had developed such a thorough and committed appetite for chaos. What they found, when they looked, was something quieter than the t-shirt suggested. Bart Simpson is dyslexic. The show confirms this obliquely across several episodes, never making a very special episode of it, never turning it into a lesson with a resolution and a credit sequence, but letting it surface in the way that true things tend to surface, through consistent behavior that, once you have the word for it, suddenly makes a different kind of sense. The trouble with reading, the gap between his verbal intelligence, which is real. The boy is genuinely sharp, quick in conversation, and quicker in a crisis, and his written performance. The way that academic effort does not reliably convert into academic result for Bart, no matter how hard he tries in the episodes where he actually tries, as though the connection between understanding and demonstrating understanding has been severed somewhere in the process. He is not stupid. Please understand this clearly, because the show has allowed the surface reading the detention slips, the D-minuses, the teacher's weary sighs to obscure something important. He is not even particularly lazy, despite the performance of laziness he maintains with considerable skill. He is a child whose intelligence operates in a way that the classroom does not accommodate, who has learned as children learn the things they need to learn to survive, that failing with a joke is more bearable than failing in earnest. The clowning is partly protective, a way to get ahead of the humiliation rather than letting it arrive unannounced. If you make people laugh first, the laughter is yours. If you wait to fail, the failure belongs to them, and they will use it. The skateboard is worth thinking about. It appears in the opening credits of every episode. Bart on the skateboard, coasting through Springfield, the town opening up around him as he moves through it. It is his transportation, his identity marker, his most physical expression of the freedom he is perpetually pursuing and perpetually being denied. But there is something else in the skateboard, something structural. The skateboard requires balance. It requires the ability to distribute your weight correctly across an unstable surface, to respond to changes in the ground beneath you with a constant minor adjustment, to find equilibrium not in stillness but in motion. You cannot stand still on a skateboard. The stillness is what tips you over. You stay upright by keeping moving. This is a fairly accurate description of how Bart Simpson navigates his life. He stays upright by moving. The scheme, the prank, the next project, the next gambit, these are not simply the products of boredom, though boredom is certainly present. They are the motion that keeps him balanced. When Bart stops moving, when an episode places him in genuine stillness, in grief or guilt, or the weight of having done something that actually hurts someone he loves, the show becomes something different. The comedy takes on a different texture. The skateboard is not under him. And the boy who is always in motion, always forward, always already planning the next thing, stands still and turns out to be, in the stillness, considerably younger than his attitude suggests. His relationship with his father is the emotional shadow that falls across everything he does, visible in the outline of every scheme and every performance of indifference and every moment when the show pulls back the smirk and shows what is underneath it. Homer is not a bad father to Bart. He is frequently an absent one, a distracted one, a father who expresses love in gestures rather than sustained attention, and who has never quite figured out how to sit with his son in the particular way that Bart most needs to be sat with. Fully present, unhurried, not waiting for the next thing to happen. What Bart is trying to reach, through the chaos and the schemes and the relentless testing of every boundary in a 10-mile radius, is his father's undivided attention. Not the half attention that Homer extends from the couch while the television is on, not the guilty attention that Homer produces after a disaster that turns out to be Bart's fault. The real thing. The eyes forward, voice gentle, nothing else matters kind of attention that Homer is very capable of giving that Bart has received in the best episodes, in the moments when something has gone wrong enough that Homer finally stops and looks at his son, and the looking becomes seeing, and that Bart has spent his entire childhood arranging situations to try to generate again. The pranks are, in this reading, love letters written in the only language that reliably gets a response, Mrs. Krabappel Edna Krabappel, the weary, occasionally wicked, ultimately sympathetic teacher who has spent more time in Bart's company than almost anyone outside his family, understood this better than the show always let her show. She was tired. She had been teaching the same curriculum to children who were approximately as willing as Bart for a long time. The energy required to see Bart whole rather than seeing just the problem he presented was not always available to her, but she had moments. In those moments, the show gave us a glimpse of something that the detention slips obscure. A teacher who sees, briefly, the child behind the performance, and who recognizes something in that child that the performance was designed to hide. There is an episode, Bart the Lover, where Bart accidentally begins a correspondence with Mrs. Krabappel that she believes is from a handsome young man. What begins as a prank becomes, almost despite itself, something genuine. Bart writes letters that are kind, letters that see her. He listens through the letters in a way he never does in class, with a patience and an attention that the classroom setting never produces. And the final letter he sends her, assembled from suggestions offered by his family around the kitchen table, his mother's tenderness and his father's bewildered sincerity and his sister's precision, all braided together, is one of the most quietly moving things the show has ever produced. A letter that tells a lonely woman she deserves better than she has settled for. Written by a boy who may not have the words for his own loneliness but somehow has them for hers. That is the Bart underneath the t-shirt. His friendship with Milhouse Van Houten is the most important relationship in his life that isn't family, and it is not a balanced friendship, and the show has always been honest about this rather than softening it into something tidier. Milhouse gives more than he gets. He is anxious where Bart is breezy, earnest where Bart is sardonic, romantically hopeful in a way that embarrasses everyone, including himself. He is perpetually about a half step behind whatever is happening, arriving at the conclusion a moment after everyone else has moved on. And Bart uses him, sometimes, in the casual and not entirely conscious way that the socially dominant use, the socially generous, knowing the use is possible, reaching for it when convenient. But Bart also protects Milhouse. This matters. When things go wrong for Milhouse, and things go very wrong for Milhouse, with a frequency that suggests the universe has identified him as a target, Bart is there. Not always in the ways that help most, not always in the ways that the situation actually requires, but present, available, the specific imperfect loyalty of someone who has decided that this person belongs in his circle and that the circle means something. Milhouse's parents divorced during the show's run, in an episode that handles the dissolution with a specificity and a sadness that the show does not always apply to adult emotional lives. Kirk and Luann Van Houten stop working in the slow, undramatic way of marriages that have simply run out of the energy required to maintain themselves, and Milhouse lives in the gap between them, shuttling between apartments, inhabiting the in-between space that children of divorcing parents always inhabit. Bart navigates this with him not with vocabulary or emotional sophistication, neither of which are Bart's strong suits, but with the simple, irreplaceable fact of showing up, of being there, of not treating the situation as a reason to make himself scarce. The school itself deserves attention, because Bart spends so much of his life inside those walls, and the walls have shaped him in ways that the comedy obscures. Springfield Elementary is underfunded. The textbooks are old. The facilities are degraded. The lunch is, by any nutritional standard, genuinely alarming. The teachers care, most of them, in the ways that their energy and their circumstances allow. But the school was not built for Bart. It has no framework for a child whose intelligence runs sideways, no accommodation for the boy who understands better with his hands than with a pencil, no patience for the energy and the restlessness, and the need for motion that characterizes Bart's relationship with learning. Its response, consistent across years, is to contain, to manage, to apply the structures designed for a different kind of child and to record, in the detention slips, the evidence of his failure to fit. The decency underneath the performance is what the show keeps returning to, across every season and every year of episodes. Because Bart, stripped of the act, stripped of the smirk and the scheme and the relentless forward motion of the skateboard, is a child who feels things deeply and does not know how to say so, who has a moral sense that his behavior obscures almost entirely, a moral sense that surfaces, briefly and reliably, in the moments when the stakes are real and the choice is genuine, who, when something actually matters, tends to make the right choice, quietly without announcement in a way that he will later deny or deflect or cover with a joke. Because if nobody notices, it can't be taken from him. Because the things Bart holds most carefully are the things he holds most quietly, in the spaces between the performances, in the private interior of a boy who has learned that showing the soft parts too openly gets them stepped on. The rebel without the reason would be a simpler character and a less interesting one. What makes Bart endure across every season and every cultural moment and every iteration of what The Simpsons is and was and is becoming is that the rebellion always had reasons. The reasons were always there, even when they were not visible, even when the show was too busy generating the next prank to pause and name them. He is 10 years old. He has always been 10 years old. He will always be 10 years old. And he is, underneath the grin and the t-shirt and the skateboard and the relentless noise of being Bart Simpson, a kid who just wanted someone to look at him and see what was actually there. Lisa Simpson, the loneliest genius. There is a particular loneliness that belongs to children who think differently from the people around them. It is not the loneliness of the outcast, exactly. The outcast at least has a clear identity, the one who stands apart, the one who has been pushed to the margin, and that identity, painful as it is, has a kind of legibility. People understand what is happening. They may not help, but they understand. The loneliness of the gifted child is more ambiguous and in some ways more difficult to navigate because it is not legible in the same way. It wears a face that adults sometimes mistake for arrogance, sometimes for precociousness, sometimes for a maturity that the child should be proud of rather than lonely about. Teachers say she's so advanced. Neighbors say she's so serious. Extended family says she's so much like her grandmother's side. And the child hears all of this and understands, because she understands most things very quickly, that what the adults are actually saying is that she is difficult to be with, that her seriousness is inconvenient, that her advancement is a quality that separates rather than connects. Lisa Simpson has lived in this loneliness since the first episode. She is 8 years old. She has an IQ that the show eventually pegs at 159, though the show is not always consistent about this, and the number matters less than the quality of attention. It names the quality of a mind that is simply running faster than the context it lives in. She reads books that her father cannot follow and does not pretend otherwise. She argues positions with a precision and a conviction that her school is not equipped to engage with, that her teachers find exhausting when they are being honest about it and admirable when they are performing encouragement. She plays the saxophone with genuine talent, not the technically accomplished performance of a child who practices, but the genuinely musical expression of someone who has understood, early, what music is actually for. She has a moral imagination that runs ahead of the world's actual morality and then waits, frequently alone, for the world to catch up. She is one of the most recognizable characters in the history of television for people who grew up feeling like the world was speaking a language slightly different from the one that came naturally to them. The people who sat at the lunch table slightly apart, who read at recess, who found the class discussion frustratingly superficial and did not yet have the social intelligence to hide this effectively, who were told in various ways and with various degrees of kindness that the intensity of their engagement with things was a little much. They recognized Lisa not as a fantasy, not as the smart kid who wins in the end. who eventually gets the peer group and the teacher and the community that sees her whole but as the actual experience. The desk by herself. The book at lunch. The moment in class when she raises her hand and the teacher chooses someone else because the answer Lisa gives will make the lesson harder to finish. There is an episode in Season 2 called Moaning Lisa that is one of the earliest and most honest things the show ever did. Lisa is sad. Not sad about any specific thing, not sad because of an event or an incident that can be fixed before the end of 22 minutes. She is sad in the larger sense, the atmospheric sadness that certain children carry, the kind that does not have a clear cause and therefore cannot have a clear cure. The kind that arrives in the morning before anything has happened, and that the school day does not dispel, and that the afternoon does not lift. She is moved by music. She is moved by the suffering of people she has never met, by the general state of a world that is not as good as it should be, and that she has apparently decided to take personally. She feels the weight of the world with a directness and a rawness that her 8-year-old nervous system was not built to fully absorb. Marge's first instinct, and the show is compassionate about this, because it is most parents' first instinct when confronted with a child's sadness that doesn't have a fixable cause, is to tell Lisa to feel better, to redirect the sadness into something more manageable, to put a more pleasant face on it for the sake of the day and the people around her and the functioning of the household. Marge loves Lisa completely. The advice comes from love, but it is the wrong advice. Telling Lisa to feel better when Lisa is sad is like telling someone to see better when the room is dark. The suggestion is structurally unhelpful. It asks the person to do something they would already be doing if they could. Marge realizes this by the episode's end. She tells Lisa something different, that she should feel exactly what she feels, without apology, without performance, and that Marge will be there in it with her. It is a small revision. It is the difference between stop and I'm here. For Lisa, that difference is enormous. The saxophone is the most important object in Lisa's world, more important than the books or the good grades or the positions, she argues. She inherited her love of jazz from her father, which is one of the show's quieter and more poignant connections between the two of them. Homer may not be able to follow Lisa's arguments about vegetarianism, or feminism, or environmental policy, or the particular injustice that has been bothering her this week. He may nod at the wrong moments, miss the point with a cheerfulness that is occasionally maddening, and fall asleep during the parts that matter most to her. But jazz is a language they share. When Lisa plays, and Homer really listens, with the kind of whole-body attention that the television usually gets, there is a connection between them that bypasses all the vocabulary that separates them. Music does what language cannot always do. It goes under the misunderstandings, under the gaps between an IQ of 55 and an IQ of 159, and finds something that is the same on both sides. She plays the saxophone when she is sad, which is frequently. She plays it at night, which is when the loneliness gets loudest. She plays it when the school day has been what school days for Lisa, almost always, are a sequence of rooms where she is either too much or not enough, never simply right, always slightly off calibration with the environment she is moving through. And the sound that comes out is not sad. Exactly. It is something more complex than sad. It is the expression of a self that cannot be adequately expressed any other way. The saxophone is the only place where the entirety of Lisa Simpson fits without remainder, without the parts of her being shaved off or tucked away or translated into something more manageable. Her activism is real, and the show has always respected it, even while occasionally finding comedy in its edges, in the gap between the seriousness of Lisa's commitments and the absurdity of the situations they lead her into. She became a vegetarian in Season 7, in the episode Lisa the Vegetarian. And unlike the character lessons that most shows deliver and then quietly forget, this one stuck. She is still a vegetarian. Across 30-plus seasons, in a show famous for its floating timeline and its selective approach to continuity, Lisa's vegetarianism persisted because the writers understood, correctly, that it was not a position she had adopted. It was a part of who she is. You can forget a position. You cannot forget a part of yourself. The same is true of her Buddhism, adopted in a later season in a way that felt earned by everything the character had been through. Buddhism, as she encountered it, offered something that very little else in Springfield had given her, a tradition that took her interior life seriously. That said, your inner world is real and worth attending to. That the question of how to live is not answered by acquiring things or impressing people or winning arguments, but by a patient, daily, humble attention to what is actually in front of you. For a child who has spent her whole life being told, implicitly, that her interiority is a little much, that she thinks too hard and feels too much, and should try to be a little easier to be around, this was not a small thing. Her relationship with Springfield is one of the show's ongoing tensions, running beneath every episode like a low-frequency hum. Lisa loves the town, or the idea of the town, the place she grew up, the place her family is, the specific streets and buildings and corner stores that constitute the geography of her childhood and that she will carry with her regardless of what she eventually becomes. But Springfield resists Lisa's love in the specific way that communities resist the member who most clearly sees their flaws. She is the vegetarian in a town of dedicated carnivores. She is the environmentalist in a town that built its economy on a nuclear plant. She is the Buddhist in a town where Ned Flanders represents the outer limit of religious earnestness. She is the child who raises her hand and asks the question that makes the lesson harder to finish. She is always slightly ahead of where Springfield is, calling back to it from a position it has not yet reached. Her relationship with her father, revisited from Lisa's side, is one of the show's most sustained achievements, the thing it keeps building, quietly, across every season, without announcing that it is building it. Homer loves Lisa without understanding her. Lisa loves Homer without being able to lean on him in the ways she most needs to lean. And yet, the love holds. Not because of the understanding is genuinely, structurally limited in ways that cannot be resolved, but because of something underneath the understanding, something older and less articulable, a recognition, a warmth that persists across the gap. Homer makes Lisa feel safe in the physical sense. He is not a man who frightens her. He is not a man who makes her feel judged, who evaluates her intelligence as a performance to be assessed rather than a person to be known. When she is in the house on Evergreen Terrace, she is in a place where her existence is not in question. She belongs there. Homer's love for her is not conditional on her being easier or quieter or less convinced that the world's wrongs should be righted before dinner. He does not know how to meet her where she is. He meets her where he is, with everything he has available to him, which is considerable in the ways that matter most. The saxophone scenes are the show's most honest portraits of Lisa's interior world. They tend to occur at night, or in the margins of episodes, or in the moments between the events of the plot when the narrative has paused and the character is briefly simply herself. The music she plays is not the music of a child practicing scales. It is the music of someone with something to say that doesn't fit into words, that the conversations and the arguments and the positions argued and defended and argued again cannot fully contain. The saxophone holds the rest. The parts of Lisa that the day has no use for. She plays and the night listens. She plays and she is, for the duration of the playing, entirely herself. Maggie Simpson the Watcher. The baby doesn't talk. In 30-plus years and hundreds of episodes, Maggie Simpson has spoken out loud in the way that the rest of her family speaks, in full sentences directed at other people who are expected to respond only a handful of times. Once, in a Season 1 cold open that the show has treated as a kind of sacred text, her first word was "Daddy," and it was delivered with a clarity and a sweetness that Homer, half asleep and barely present in the scene, did not quite register. He was there, he heard it, but his brain, moving at its particular pace, did not fully receive it. The moment passed. She went back to the pacifier. The show moved on. She has spoken since then, in special circumstances, in clip shows and fantasy sequences, and one extraordinary short film that we will return to. But in the ongoing daily texture of the show in the living room and the kitchen and the back seat of the family car, Maggie does not speak. She watches. And the watching the show has gradually revealed is itself a kind of power, not the passive, incidental watching of someone who has nothing to say. The active, strategic, deliberate watching of someone who has decided that watching is more useful at this particular moment in this particular situation than speaking would be. Consider what it means to be the youngest in a house like that. To arrive after the dynamics are already set. After Homer and Marge have found their particular rhythm, after Bart has established his role as the provocateur, and Lisa has claimed her role as the conscience, and the household has arranged itself around those energies with the settled quality of furniture that has been moved into position and forgotten about. To arrive into a system that is already running and to have, as your available contribution, only presence, only watching, only the small sounds that a baby makes and the gradual accumulation of what is understood. Maggie came after. And coming after, in the Simpson household, meant inheriting a household that was already defined. She could not be the funny one Bart had that. She could not be the earnest one Lisa had that. She could not be the provider or the worrier or the stumbling heart those roles were filled, had been filled before she arrived. What was left for Maggie Simpson was the space that nobody else was occupying, the silence. She found it. She moved into it. She made it hers with the calm confidence of someone who has recognized an advantage and chosen to use it. The pacifier is always there. It is the most consistent visual fact of Maggie's character, more consistent than any other single element of any character in the show, because even Homer's donut and Marge's pearls and Bart's skateboard are occasionally absent in the right context. The pacifier is never absent. It moves, it communicates, it speaks in the way that Maggie's actual voice does not. The speed of the sucking is a barometer of her emotional state. The angle of the chin is a barometer of her attention. The removal of it, the rare moments when it comes out and something more definite is expressed, carries enormous weight precisely because of its rarity. When Maggie Simpson puts down the pacifier, what comes next is significant. The show has always known this and used it accordingly. Maggie is often the first character in a scene to notice that something is wrong. She is often the last to be noticed doing so. She reads the room with a thoroughness that suggests the room reading is her primary occupation, not a background activity, but the foreground one. The thing she is doing when everyone else thinks she is simply sitting in the high chair, or on the blanket, or in the corner, being the baby that adults treat babies as being. She does not participate in the scenes the way the other characters participate. She is almost always positioned at the edge of the action, in the high chair at the edge of the kitchen table, in Homer's arms at the edge of whatever disaster is unfolding, in the corner of the living room with a view of the entire space, with the sight lines of someone who has thought about where to stand. She is always watching from the best possible angle. The short film, The Longest Daycare, deserves to be considered in full, because it is one of the most revealing pieces of Maggie characterization the show has ever produced. And it does it without a word of dialogue from her. Released in 2012 and nominated for an Academy Award, which is its own remarkable fact, that a 7-minute Simpsons short was considered worthy of Academy recognition, it places Maggie alone in a daycare center, separated from her family, in a facility that runs with an efficiency that borders on the ominous. Inside this facility, Maggie encounters a caterpillar in the process of becoming a butterfly. She wants to protect it. Another baby Gerald, the one-eyebrowed antagonist who has appeared in the show's opening sequence since the very first episode, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the daycare staff, and the facility's security systems to save the caterpillar and release the butterfly into the open air. She does this without speaking a word. She does it through observation, through planning, through the kind of adaptive problem-solving that the film depicts as entirely natural for her, not exceptional, not surprising, simply what she does when she needs to do something. She reads the environment. She identifies threats. She develops strategies on the fly. She executes multi-step plans that require timing, spatial awareness, and the ability to predict other people's behavior accurately enough to stay a step ahead of them. She does all of this while being physically limited to the motor skills of a 1-year-old. Her body can barely keep up with her mind. She falls, she stumbles, she crawls when she should be running. But her decision-making is, throughout, correct. Every choice she makes is the right choice for the situation she is in. Every move she makes is optimized for the outcome she is trying to achieve. She is operating at a cognitive level that her physical development cannot support, and she succeeds anyway because her intelligence compensates for every limitation her body imposes. The relationship between Maggie and Homer is the most purely tender thread in the show, and its purity comes from a specific quality. Maggie does not require anything of Homer except his presence. She does not need him to be smarter or more reliable or a better provider or a more attentive partner. She does not frame his failures or note his limitations or wish, in the quiet of her own interior, that he were different. She simply reaches for him when he is close, curls into him when he sits down, And the gesture of her small hand finding his large one is one of the show's most recurring images of love in its most stripped-down form. Not love that asks, not love that negotiates. Love that simply arrives without conditions. Homer, who has so much trouble maintaining the attention and the patience that Bart needs, who struggles to bridge the intellectual gap with Lisa, who has to be managed and reminded and gently redirected by Marge Homer with Maggie, is simply at peace. He holds her with the naturalness of a man who has found the one relationship in his life that asks nothing of him but to show up. And he shows up. Fully, quietly, without the stumbling that characterizes most of his other interactions. The shooting of Mr. Burns remains the most famous Maggie moment in the show's history, and, examined closely, one of the most revealing. Whatever the specific circumstances, and the show leaves this productively ambiguous, a gap in the story that the viewer fills. According to their own reading of the character, what is clear is that Maggie, in a situation that was genuinely unexpected and genuinely dangerous, acted. She located a gun, she pointed it, she fired it. The outcome placed her at the center of Springfield's most famous mystery. And then, when everyone had left the room and she was alone, she took the pacifier and moved it in a motion that mimicked the trigger pull. Deliberately. After checking that no one was watching. That sequence, the looking around, the confirmation of solitude, the private reenactment requires situational awareness, memory, caution, and impulse control. These are not traits associated with infants. These are traits associated with someone who understands exactly what they're doing and has decided that performing this gesture in front of others would have consequences. She is 1 year old. She is 1 year old, and she is making decisions about what to reveal and what to keep private. The reading of Maggie's silence that the show seems to endorse quietly, without insisting on it, is that the silence is chosen, that Maggie Simpson is watching and learning. That she is taking in everything the family does, every pattern and every failure and every recovery and every act of love that the household produces on its daily rounds, and she is building, in the quiet space behind the pacifier, an understanding of the world that is more complete than any of them suspect. She is the youngest. She is the one everyone explains things in front of because surely the baby doesn't understand. And the baby understands everything. She will speak. The show implies this without saying it. When Maggie is ready, when she has something to say, when the moment arrives that she has been patient as a photographer, waiting for the light, waiting for, in the meantime, she watches, and she sees everything. Mr. Burns, the immortal architect, he is, by any reasonable accounting, the villain of Springfield. He owns the nuclear power plant. He controls the town's energy supply. He employs Homer Simpson and hundreds of others in conditions that a labor inspector would describe as a prolonged emergency, and that the show depicts, in its more honest moments, as genuinely dangerous rather than merely comedically hazardous. He has stolen things, endangered people, blocked out the sun over an entire town, not as a metaphor but as a literal act of hubris, released hounds with a cheerfulness that suggests the releasing of hounds is one of the genuine pleasures of his day. He is old in a way that edges toward the uncanny at various points. The show gives his age as anything from 80 to 104, to a number that has essentially stopped carrying meaning, that gestures towards some antiquity beyond the range of normal counting. He is also, if you sit with the full picture of him across 36 seasons and hundreds of appearances and dozens of episode-length explorations, one of the most meticulously constructed characters the series has produced. Not because he is complex in a way that excuses anything. He is not. He is genuinely, enthusiastically, without significant caveat, awful. But the construction is careful, and underneath the awfulness, beneath the hounds and the schemes and the inability to remember the name of a man who has worked for him for 3 decades, is a portrait of something the show treats with the kind of sustained attention that is almost like sympathy. Charles Montgomery Burns was born into privilege so old that it had stopped being recognizable as privilege and had simply become the texture of existence, the background radiation of a life lived at a remove from consequences. The Burns family wealth predates most American institutions. The show has established this across episodes, has given glimpses of a family tree so old that its roots disappear into the kind of history that exists before records were kept reliably. Burns inherited this legacy and has been extending it through intelligence and ruthlessness and the specific advantage of having started with more than almost anyone else for well over a century. He has a cane. It is ivory or possibly whalebone. The show is not specific about this, which is itself a kind of specificity. The kind of man who carries a cane is also the kind of man whose cane is made of something that required the death of something large and previously magnificent, and the not saying, which maintains a certain elegant deniability. He moves through his mansion with a slowness that is its own form of menace. Not the slowness of the frail, not the shuffling of someone whose body has outrun its capacity for motion, the slowness of the deliberate. Of a man who has not been in a hurry for so long that urgency has become foreign to him, who understands at the cellular level that things will wait for him because things always have, because the arrangement of the world places him in the position of the one who is waited for rather than the one who waits. His childhood is glimpsed in the episode Rosebud, which is widely considered one of the finest in the series, and which approaches its subject, the richest man in Springfield, the most powerful man in Springfield, reduced to desperate longing for a teddy bear with a lightness and a depth that is the show at its very best. Bobo was the name of the bear. Burns had it as a child, before the money had fully arrived or the power had fully congealed, back when he was simply a boy with a toy that he loved in the uncomplicated way that children love things before complication becomes inevitable. The bear was lost. The years passed. The power accumulated. The bear remained lost. When he wants it back, when the episode makes clear that of all the things he has accumulated and all the things he has taken and all the things he has built and maintained and protected with his enormous and aging body of resources, the one thing he actually wants is a toy bear, from before the world arranged itself around his ruthlessness. The show offers that information without sentimentality and without easy redemption. Burns wants the bear because the bear is from before the treatments and the schemes and the hounds and the cruelty that has become, over decades, simply the shape of how he moves through the world. Before all of that was the person he was then. The child with the bear, the person for whom simplicity was still available. He cannot buy his way back to that. Money cannot purchase the before. This is one of the few facts about the universe that Burns appears to have accepted, and the acceptance has not made him kinder or more reflective or more inclined toward the general well-being of the people whose lives his decisions shape. It has simply deposited in him a specific, targeted longing for one object and the person that object represents. He is kept alive by a combination of treatments that the show presents as simultaneously absurd and genuinely ominous. His medical maintenance is extensive and precise. Smithers is, among his many other functions, the person who ensures that the treatments happen on schedule, that the particular weekly medical intervention that keeps Mr. Burns's diseases in their precarious equilibrium is administered correctly, that the margin for error, which is zero, is not exceeded. The doctor who delivers the famous Three Stooges syndrome diagnosis, the explanation that Burns has every disease known to medical science, all of them present simultaneously, all of them blocking each other in a biological gridlock that prevents any single illness from gaining dominance and killing him, is describing something that sounds like a joke and functions, within the show's internal logic, as a genuine portrait of a man who has been maintained past his natural end by resources that nobody else in Springfield has access to. The treatments involve radiation. Of course they do. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's water and air and bodies for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological functions. He is not simply profiting from radiation, he is powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by decades of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. This is the show's most quietly chilling detail about Burns, that the thing he has been doing to Springfield, the slow contamination that has shaped the town and its residents in ways nobody has been allowed to fully examine, is also the thing that keeps him alive. He is the source and the product simultaneously. He has poisoned the well that he is drinking from, and the poisoning has preserved him. Smithers is the other part of the equation. Smithers manages the schedule. Smithers monitors the condition. Smithers ensures, through the organizational precision that is his defining professional quality, that the things that need to happen for Mr. Burns to continue existing happen correctly and on time. Without Smithers, the suggestion is clear, Burns would miss a dose. Without the dose, the equilibrium collapses. Without the equilibrium, the diseases surge. The margin between Charles Montgomery Burns and the death that should have claimed him decades ago is, in some significant sense, Wayland Smithers. His relationship to the people of Springfield is the relationship of a man who has lived so long and accumulated so much that ordinary human categories have started to fail him. He does not relate to the residents as people. Exactly, they are instruments, liabilities, occasionally amusing distractions from the work of managing an empire that would require less attention if it were managed less completely. He relates to them the way a man might relate to the weather, as a force that must be accounted for but that cannot be negotiated with on equal terms. Homer, oddly, is the partial exception, not because Burns respects him. The concept of respect implies a degree of equality that Burns would not extend. But Homer occupies a unique position in the Burns cosmology because Homer keeps happening to him. Their lives intersect with a frequency and a weird intimacy that cannot be explained by the ordinary structures of employer-employee hierarchy. Homer has saved Burns's life. Homer has cost Burns millions of dollars. Homer has been fired by Burns so many times that the act of firing has lost its consequential force and become something closer to a ritual, a seasonal adjustment, a thing that happens and then unhappens with the reliability of weather. Burns, who does not experience affection in the conventional sense, has something for Homer, something that is not warmth and is not fondness, but that is also not nothing, a recognition. The particular irritation that shades into a kind of reliance when a person or a situation has been part of your life long enough that their absence would constitute a noticeable change in the texture of things. Homer is part of the texture of Burns's life. He has been for 36 years. In his most illuminating episodes, the ones where the show peels back the villainy and shows the structure beneath, Burns is revealed as a man who has won every material victory available to him and who has arrived at an extreme old age with nothing in it that resembles companionship or peace. He has money in quantities that have stopped being representable. He has power that extends through the economy and the politics and the social infrastructure of the town he essentially owns. He has his hounds, who are probably the closest thing to affection in his daily life. He has Smithers, who loves him with a completeness and a pathos that is one of the show's most carefully sustained pieces of characterization. And he is alone, in every way that matters, in every way that money cannot fix. He will release the hounds every morning. He will plot. He will accumulate, he will take his treatments and maintain the equilibrium, and continue through the infrastructure of preserved wealth to be the oldest man in Springfield. And somewhere in the enormous house, in a room that has not been cataloged in decades, is Bobo, the bear, from before. The one thing in all of this that represents something that was not acquired through power or purchased through money or maintained through the management of subordinates. The one thing that was simply loved once by a child who had not yet become this. Ned Flanders, the cage of kindness. He is the best neighbor in Springfield, and possibly the best neighbor in the history of American television, and the show has spent 36 years making this abundantly, almost exhaustingly clear. He is also, the show has gradually revealed, one of the most quietly suffering characters it has ever produced. The two things are connected. They have always been connected. Understanding Ned Flanders in full requires sitting with the possibility that the most outwardly cheerful person in a room is frequently the person working hardest to stay that way, that the cheerfulness is not a natural state, arrived at through luck or constitution, but an achievement maintained daily through effort that the cheerfulness itself conceals. Ned Flanders lives next door to Homer Simpson. This arrangement, the most devout man in Springfield placed immediately adjacent to the most reliably irreverent one, separated by a white fence that Homer has damaged in at least 3 different ways across the show's run, is the show's most productive spatial joke, the one that generates the most comedy and the most genuine feeling simultaneously. He lends Homer tools that are never returned. He maintains his lawn with a precision that makes Homer's look like a considered aesthetic choice. He has raised his sons, Rod and Todd, in a household of such deliberate goodness that the boys flinch at the slightest exposure to anything outside the warm radius of Bible stories and wholesome board games and the particular variety of sheltered happiness that Ned has constructed for them with the care of a man who knows what it is to need shelter. He calls Homer neighborino. He waves, he smiles. The verbal tics, the diddly and the doodly, the particular Flanders-specific vocabulary that has become its own linguistic tradition function as a kind of constant gentle redirection, small euphemisms that keep the conversation in the register of cheerfulness, that root around whatever darker or more direct word might have been reaching toward the surface before the cheerfulness intercepted it. Hurricane Nettie is the key to everything about Ned Flanders, and it is worth spending time with. A hurricane hits Springfield. The town rallies to rebuild Ned's house, which was destroyed in the storm, and does so with such cheerful and comprehensive incompetence that the result is a structure that collapses almost immediately, a building that incorporates every well-meaning mistake that the people of Springfield are collectively capable of making, which turns out to be quite a lot. And Ned, who has been patient through the storm and patient through the loss of his house and patient through the weeks of watching his neighbors do their enthusiastic worst, reaches the end of something. He snaps. The monologue that follows is one of the most extraordinary moments the show has ever produced, because it is both recognizably funny and completely devastating. Ned says what he actually thinks, not the neighborino version of what he thinks, not the processed, redirected, euphemized, diddly softened version, the actual thing. He says what he thinks about Homer, specifically with an honesty and a precision and an accumulated heat that makes clear that this has not been building for weeks but for decades. He says what he thinks about the town that rebuilt his house so badly it fell down immediately. He says it, and it comes out raw and true and barely controllable, and the people hearing it go quiet. And then he checks himself into a mental health facility, where the therapist discovers the architecture beneath the cheerfulness. Ned Flanders has been burying his rage and his frustration and his resentment since childhood. He was raised by parents who were, the show presents this with its particular brand of absurdist precision, part of a movement that rejected all discipline for children on philosophical grounds. No rules, no structure, no consequences for any behavior, no framework within which the child could learn to manage his own impulses. Ned ran wild. He could not function in the world, and he was eventually subjected to a therapeutic treatment so intense and so extended that it overcorrected completely. The wildness was suppressed, the frustration was sealed. The anger was put somewhere deep and told to stay there. And what emerged from the treatment was Ned cheerful, patient, kind, generous, devout, and carrying underneath all of it the suppressed original self in a condition of permanent compression. The goodness of Ned Flanders is real. This needs to be said clearly and believed, because it is easy, armed with the knowledge of the childhood and the conditioning, to read the goodness as false as performance, without substance, as the mask without the face. But the goodness is real. The faith is genuine. The love for Rod and Todd is genuine. The generosity with the tools and the casseroles and the time and the neighborly patience that Homer requires in truly extraordinary quantities, all of it is real. It comes from a real place. He is not performing Christianity for an audience. But underneath the goodness is everything that the goodness was built to contain. The rage that was conditioned out of him before he was old enough to choose. The grief that the conditioning never made space for. The loneliness of being the most obviously good person in a neighborhood in a whole town full of people who are spectacularly bad at being good and having to love them anyway, because love is what you do, because love is the practice, and the practice is the point. Because the alternative to loving the people around you is a version of yourself that Ned has been specifically trained since childhood not to become. His wife Maud died. This is the most quietly devastating fact in Ned's story, the weight that the cheerfulness is draped across. Maud Flanders died in season 11, killed absurdly by a t-shirt cannon at a NASCAR event, a death that is, in its mechanics, a comedy and, in its consequences, a tragedy. The show brought Ned through the grief with a seriousness that surprised many viewers who had expected the death to be forgotten within an episode or two. Instead, the series allowed him to grieve. To date, badly. To try to rebuild something that felt like the warmth he had lost. To continue to be a father to Rod and Todd, while simultaneously being a man who had lost the person who made the whole enterprise of being Ned Flanders feel sustainable. His kindness isn't simply a character trait. It is a psychological cage built around a feral child by a doctor who, with the best intentions, removed from Ned the ability to express a range of entirely human emotions. Everything about Ned's life reads differently once you know this. His patience with Homer isn't saintly. It is, in a genuine clinical sense, pathological, not a virtue freely chosen but a conditioned response. The automatic suppression of what would otherwise be a completely understandable reaction to a man who has borrowed your lawnmower and returned it in 3 pieces. His faith isn't only spiritual conviction, it is also, and the show has been honest about this, a coping mechanism for a man who needs an external framework, something larger than himself, something that holds the whole structure in place to explain why he keeps suffering despite doing everything right. His relationship with Homer deserves its own sustained attention because it is at the center of his daily life and at the center of the show's understanding of what goodness costs. Homer drives Ned to the edge of sanity on a regular basis. Homer borrows things and breaks them. Homer says exactly the wrong thing with absolute consistency, arriving at the worst possible phrasing of any situation with a cheerfulness that makes it simultaneously worse and somehow less damaging than deliberate cruelty would be. Homer fails to understand Ned's faith not because he is contemptuous of it. Contempt requires a sustained focus that Homer does not apply, but because Homer is genuinely, constitutionally unable to maintain attention long enough to engage with anything that doesn't directly affect his immediate comfort. And yet Ned keeps choosing Homer, keeps lending the tools, keeps waving over the fence, keeps finding it in himself, day after day, year after year, to be the neighbor that Homer does not deserve. The show has gestured towards something without quite saying it. Ned Flanders admires Homer Simpson. Not the behavior, not the carelessness or the irresponsibility or the decade-spanning series of preventable disasters, but the ease. The way Homer can be wrong about almost everything and still sleep deeply, still move through the world with a buoyancy that the rightness of Ned's choices has never produced. The way Homer's faith, not in God, but in the orange couch and the next meal, and Marge beside him and the family assembled, is absolute and uncomplicated and costs him nothing. He did not have to build it. He did not have to suppress anything to maintain it. It is simply there, as natural and unquestioned as breathing. Ned works very hard at peace. Homer has it by default. And there is the show's darkest joke about its most religious character. The God of The Simpsons is real. Explicitly, physically real, appearing to characters, having conversations, existing as a fact of this universe rather than a matter of theological interpretation. Homer has met God. This has happened in the show on multiple occasions, and God has not appeared to Ned Flanders. The man who has organized his entire existence around his faith, who prays and tithes and attends every service, and speaks the language of his tradition with a fluency and a sincerity that no one else in Springfield can approach. This man has not received the conversation that Homer, who falls asleep during the sermon, has received. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The drunk who sleeps through church gets divine conversation. The devout man who has dedicated his life to faith gets silence. Perhaps the silence is its own kind of answer. Perhaps the practice, the daily, sustained, relentless practice of trying to be good in the specific and costly way that Ned tries, without the guarantee of divine confirmation, is the faith itself. Perhaps Ned's relationship with God does not require the face-to-face conversation because the relationship lives in the practice and the practice is constant and the constancy is, in its way, more faithful than Homer's ecstatic encounters. The show does not resolve this. Ned waves over the fence. Homer waves back, usually without looking up. The morning continues. Wayland Smithers, the man who keeps the engine running. Every functioning institution has someone who actually runs it. Not the person at the top, not the figurehead or the owner or the chairman of the board or the face in the portrait above the fireplace. The person underneath that person. The one who knows where the files are, who has memorized the schedules, who anticipates the problems before they arrive and solves them before the person at the top is ever disturbed by the existence of a problem. Who drafts the correspondence and manages the calendar and ensures that the thing that needs to be done is done correctly and on time and without the kind of visible effort that would remind anyone that it required effort? Who makes the institution look, from the outside, as though it runs itself. Wayland Smithers Jr. is that person. He is Mr. Burns's executive assistant, first assistant, chief of staff, and, in the fullest and most accurate sense of the word, keeper. He keeps Mr. Burns organized, medicated, dressed, transported, informed, shielded from the administrative reality of running a nuclear power plant with 142 safety violations, and, when necessary, protected from the social and legal consequences of decisions that, in the hands of a less competent manager, would have resulted in consequences considerably more severe. He does this work with an efficiency that is total, with a discretion that is complete, and with a devotion that is something considerably more complicated than professional. Smithers loves Mr. Burns. The show established this early in the first seasons, when the nature of the relationship was communicated through visual gags and implications, rather than direct statement, and has maintained it with a consistency and a care that was, in retrospect, remarkable for a primetime animated series running in the early 1990s. Television, at that time, did not always know what to do with a character like Smithers. The show found a way. It committed to the character's reality, the fullness of who he is, without turning him into a joke and without reducing him to a single note. The love is real. It shapes everything he does. It is the organizing principle of his professional and personal life simultaneously, because in Smithers's case, the professional and personal are not separable. They collapsed into each other so long ago that the seam is no longer locatable. He grew up in the shadow of Mr. Burns, which is not metaphorical. His father worked at the plant. His father died in an incident at the plant when Smithers was very young, in circumstances that the show depicts with the dark comedy it applies to most things, but that carry, beneath the comedy, a genuine weight. Mr. Burns, in his peculiar and limited way, took an interest in the boy afterward. Not a warm interest. Not the interest of a man who feels responsibility for the child of someone who died in his service. The interest of a man who finds it convenient to have loyalties that begin early and run deep. Smithers came of age understanding that his world and Burns's world were connected, that the arc of his future bent toward the man in the portrait, and so it did. He went to work for Burns. He became indispensable. He became the center of an operation that would have struggled significantly without him. Not failed, exactly, because Burns has the money to buy replacements for most things, but struggled, visibly and expensively, in ways that would have been embarrassing. And in becoming indispensable, Smithers created the condition of his own permanence. He is too necessary to let go of, too deeply embedded in the processes of Burns's daily life to be replaced by anyone else who could learn the job in less than years. The power dynamic is the tragedy at the core of what they are to each other. Mr. Burns does not love Smithers in return. He is fond of him, in the way that a person might be fond of a particularly reliable piece of equipment, with a warmth that is real but that does not extend to recognition of what the equipment is, of what it costs the equipment to function, of what the equipment might be if it were not deployed entirely in his service. He registers Smithers's absence with discomfort, which is as close to need as Burns comes. He shows occasional, almost accidental flickers of something that might, in a different man, be called tenderness. But the full emotional weight of what Smithers carries, the love, the devotion, the years of self-subordination to someone who cannot fully appreciate what that subordination costs Mr. Burns does not and cannot return it in kind. Smithers's apartment is one of the show's more revealing background details, offered quietly and without emphasis, which is the way the show tends to offer its most honest information. It is meticulous, orderly, everything in its place, everything maintained with the same precision he brings to the work. And on the wall in an early episode, presented as a visual gag that lingers in the memory, is a large portrait of Mr. Burns. Just there, in the apartment, in the personal space, in the home that is the one place in Smithers's life that exists entirely outside the professional structure. Where another person might have family photographs or artwork or windows left uncovered because the view is worth keeping, a portrait of Mr. Burns. This could be played as simple comedy, and the show does play it that way, because the show plays most painful things with a layer of comedy on top of them. But the portrait in the apartment is information. Here is a man who has organized his personal space, the space that belongs only to him, where no professional necessity would require the presence of his employer's image around the image of the person he loves. who has, in some sense, made his private life as much about Mr. Burns as his working life, so that there is no space in his existence that is entirely free of the organizing principle of that love. The structure of Smithers's days reveals the life that love has produced. He arrives before Mr. Burns. He has arranged the day before it needs to begin, the appointments confirmed, the correspondence sorted, the particular sequence of activities and medications and meetings that keeps Mr. Burns operational and appropriately insulated from the administrative reality of the institution he owns. He has anticipated the problems that have not yet arrived. He has solutions ready for difficulties that exist only as possibilities. He is, in the management of Mr. Burns's existence, something like a very attentive and very private novelist, always several plot points ahead, always holding the narrative together so that the protagonist can move through it without being troubled by its construction. He does this out of love, not out of duty or habit or the absence of alternatives or the inertia of having been doing it for so long that the doing of it has become simply the shape of his days. Out of love. The efficiency is motivated. Every arrangement he makes is made because Mr. Burns requires it, and Smithers wants above everything else, with a consistency that the years have not diminished for Mr. Burns to be well and comfortable and sustained. The professional and the personal are not separate categories for Wayland Smithers. They are the same thing, expressed in different registers. He has qualities beyond his devotion. The show has established this in the gaps, in the glimpses of who he is when the work momentarily pauses. He is cultured, genuinely interested in musical theater and performance and the arts, with a depth of engagement that goes considerably beyond the casual. He is intelligent in ways that his current role does not fully require, which means there is always some portion of his capacity that is underemployed, running and idle. He is capable of genuine warmth with people outside the Burns orbit, though he rarely has the time or the energy to pursue those connections in any sustained way. He is funny, occasionally, in the way of very smart people who have developed a dark private sense of humor as a coping mechanism for a situation that they cannot change through any other means. In later seasons, the show gave Smithers a degree of resolution that the character had been waiting for, a movement toward honesty about himself and his life, that the long years of the Burns arrangement had made difficult, and that the show, to its credit, finally allowed. The resolution is presented gently, without drama, as simply the next thing that needed to happen, the next step in a character's evolution that had been building for decades. It does not undo the years. It does not retroactively resolve the question of what those years were, or what they cost him, or whether the cost was worth paying. It simply opens a door. The door was always there. He is at his desk before Mr. Burns arrives. The coffee is ready. The day is arranged. The love persists. Because love, in its deepest form, does not require reciprocity to continue existing. It requires only the person who holds it. Sideshow Bob, the tragedy beneath the villain. There is a particular kind of person who is too intelligent for the life they ended up in, and who has decided, at some point and with a conviction that subsequent events have failed to dislodge, that the world owes them a better one. You have met versions of this person, maybe in school, in the form of the classmate who could not accept that the teacher's assessment of their work was genuine and not a conspiracy. Maybe in a workplace, in the form of the colleague who was passed over for promotion and decided that the oversight was personal rather than structural, that the system was specifically arrayed against them rather than simply indifferent. Maybe in the mirror, on a bad day when the gap between what you believe yourself capable of and what the world has actually asked of you is wide enough to look like a judgment. The intelligence is real. The resentment is real. The tragedy is that these two things, combined in the wrong proportions under the wrong circumstances, and then marinated in the specific indignities of Springfield, have produced a person who uses the first to fuel the second, and calls the result a philosophy. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. Sideshow Bob is that person. He is the most fully realized recurring villain in The Simpsons, and he is fully realized precisely because the show has never been satisfied with him as a simple antagonist, never been content to let him exist only as the obstacle to be defeated in Bart's stories. Every time Bob has returned, the show has asked the same question from a different angle. How does someone this gifted end up here? What is the road from Yale, the degree, the training, the person that Yale produced to this? To the fright wig and the oversized shoes and the endlessly thwarted schemes and the recurring ignominy of being stopped by the same 10-year-old, again, in front of the same witnesses, with the same outcome, Kelsey Grammer is the key to the character in a way that cannot be overstated. The voice he brings to Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is the voice of a man who believes himself to be performing at the wrong level. Not a bad actor playing at being good, but a genuinely excellent performer, doing work that falls considerably beneath his gifts, who has been doing it long enough to have achieved a particular quality of anguished resignation about it. The vocabulary is extraordinary, reaching into literatures and histories and musical traditions that no other character in Springfield can access. The references are genuine. When Bob deploys Gilbert and Sullivan mid-scheme, when the words of a Victorian comic opera emerge naturally from the mouth of a man in a villain's costume in the middle of an escape plan, it is not affectation. It is the natural language of a man for whom this is first language, who grew up with it, who has carried it through a series of increasingly undignified circumstances that it was never designed to survive. His origin is Krusty, the Clown's television show, where he worked as a sidekick before framing Krusty for armed robbery and attempting to take over the program himself. The crime is petty in scale, a local television show, a Springfield institution, not exactly a global prize. But the motivation beneath it is enormous. Bob believed he was better than what the show was asking him to be. He was right. He was better. The tragedy is that being better in the world Sideshow Bob occupies turned out to matter less than he expected. He is foiled across countless episodes by Bart Simpson. This is the relationship that defines him, the one that the show keeps returning to with a fondness and a complexity that lifted above simple hero-villain mechanics. Bob and Bart have, at this point, a relationship that is older than most of the friendships in Springfield, a long, absurd, escalating, somehow affectionate war between a boy who should have no chance against a Yale-educated former sidekick with decades more experience and somehow always wins, and a genius who cannot stop losing to a 10-year-old. The losing is part of the character. The show understands this. Bob needs to lose to Bart in the same way that certain people need to be thwarted by the thing they most despise, because the thwarting confirms the story they are telling themselves about the world. The world is stupid. The world is arrayed against me. The world sends children to defeat me because the world cannot face me directly. And so long as the story holds, Bob does not have to look at the simpler explanation, that the plans are too theatrical, that the intelligence is real but the judgment is wrong, that a man who would rather be seen as brilliant than actually succeed has built his schemes on the wrong foundation. There is an episode where he settles in Tuscany with a wife and a son, attempting to leave Springfield and his obsessions behind. He is, for a brief stretch, genuinely happy. The architecture of the life in Italy, the countryside, the culture, the family at the table in the evening, the conversation that his intelligence can finally meet as an equal, suits him with a completeness that is almost painful to watch. Because you can see, in his happiness, the person he could have been. He was built for this. He was built for beauty and leisure and the kind of life where intelligence is applied to pleasure and conversation and appreciation rather than to elaborate plans for revenge. But he cannot leave Bart behind. He cannot leave the war behind. The obsession calls him back, as it always does, because the war with Bart is the only relationship in Bob's life that provides him with what he actually needs, which is not victory, but engagement. Bart is the only person in Springfield who engages with him fully, who takes the schemes seriously, who treats him as the threat he actually is, rather than the comedic figure the town has decided he should be. Bart's attention, even in opposition, especially in opposition, is exactly what Bob needs. The battle between them is not, in its deepest structure, a battle Bob is trying to win. It is a performance he is trying to maintain. If Bart ever stopped caring, if Bart ever turned away and decided that Sideshow Bob was simply not worth the attention anymore, the defeat would be total. Not the defeat of a scheme, the defeat of the person. Because what Bob has organized his life around, underneath the resentment and the plans and the elaborate villainy, is an audience. One specific audience. One 10-year-old boy in Springfield who looks at him and sees, fully and clearly, and with appropriate alarm, exactly what Bob is. That is, for Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., closer to being seen than anything else in his life has provided. The rake is the show's most famous Sideshow Bob gag. The long sequence in which Bob, walking through a yard, steps on rake after rake in an escalating comedy of pain and repetition. It goes on far longer than comedy should allow, so long that it passes through funny and out the other side into something that functions more like a philosophical statement. Bob sees the rakes. He keeps stepping on them. He cannot stop. The face that Kelsey Grammer provides, that magnificent, anguished, expressive face, going through every available human response to unexpected pain, tells you everything. A man who is too smart not to know exactly what is happening and too locked into the pattern of his own life to do anything about it. Too smart to be here. Here anyway. Seeing the rakes. Stepping on them regardless. That is Sideshow Bob. And somehow, 36 years in, that is still one of the funniest and saddest things the show has ever done. Krusty the Clown, the sadness behind the smile. The face paint is thick. White base, red mouth extended into a grin that no human face produces naturally, enormous shoes, the wig a violent orange, the collar a flounce of excess layers of performance stacked on top of one another until the person underneath is effectively invisible, buried under decades of professional branding and the accumulated weight of the thing he agreed to become, Krusty the Clown, beloved by generations of Springfield children. Host of a program that has been running in one form or another since before some of its audience was born. The face on the merchandise and the voice of the commercials, and the painted grin that you see from across the store and recognize immediately the way you recognize icons. Hosted by Herschel Schmoikel Krustofsky, who does not go by that name, who has not gone by that name in so long that the name feels like something from a different life, which is exactly what it is. Krusty is the show's most sustained exploration of the gap between public persona and private person. The space between the thing you perform for the world and the person doing the performing. He is famous in a way that Homer is not, in a way that even Mr. Burns is not. Burns's fame is institutional and cold, the fame of power. Krusty's fame is personal and warm, and has been built on the affection of children, which is both the most rewarding and the most complicated kind of fame there is. Because children's affection is genuine in a way that adult admiration rarely is, and it asks things of you that adult admiration does not. The face is painted on. Every day the face is painted on. And the face is not Herschel Krustofsky. The face is the product. The product is beloved. The man who makes the product possible comes with it, but was not what was purchased, and has spent decades negotiating the distance between the two. His father, Rabbi Hyman Krustofsky, given a weight and a warmth by Jackie Mason in his appearances on the show that the role required and deserved, was a man of learning and of dignity and of specific, considered hopes for his son. The comedy felt to him like a betrayal. Not a deliberate one, not a son who chose his career to wound his father, but a betrayal nonetheless. A son who had turned away from the tradition, from the seriousness, from the community of learning and practice that his father had devoted his life to and had hoped, in the way of fathers, to see his son inhabit. The oversized shoes and the rubber chickens and the painted grin on a children's television show were not what Rabbi Krustofsky had envisioned. The laughter of children, however genuine, was not the learning he had valued. The estrangement came from here. Not from anger. Exactly, anger would have been easier to resolve. From a mutual and loving incomprehension. The father who loved his son and could not understand the son's choices. The son who loved his father and could not give him what his father needed. Neither of them cruel. Both of them lonely in a specific and adjacent way that should have made them able to reach each other and somehow made it harder instead. The episode Like Father, Like Clown is one of the most emotionally ambitious things the show attempted in its golden years, and it works because it refuses to condescend to its subject. It requires the audience to take seriously a storyline about a clown's estrangement from his rabbi father, to find in that premise not only comedy but genuine feeling, and it delivers on the requirement because the writers understood that the feelings inside an absurd situation are not themselves absurd. The grief is real. The longing for reconciliation is real. The specific shape of what stands between them, not ideology, not cruelty, but the unbridgeable gap between two people who love each other and cannot find the language to say so across the width of their different understandings of what a life should be, is real. Bart and Lisa help engineer the reunion. This is the telling detail. It is not Krusty who reaches across the gap himself. He has been Krusty for so long, has inhabited the performance so completely that the private man, the son, Herschel, is no longer practiced at asserting himself in situations that require vulnerability. He needs the children, who have no investment in the armor and no patience for pretending it isn't there, to reach across the gap for him. He smokes between takes. This is one of the show's most efficient pieces of characterization. The clown, in full costume, with the face and the wig and the enormous shoes, smoking a cigarette in the break between segments of a children's program. The juxtaposition says everything about Krusty's relationship to his own performance. The performance is the job. The cigarette is the person. The job and the person coexist without contradiction because Krusty has, long since, stopped trying to reconcile them. They are two separate things that happen in the same body. The body accommodates both. This is what you do. His show is, by the evidence of many episodes, genuinely chaotic in ways that should have attracted regulatory attention. The production values have declined at various points to levels that suggest a man who has stopped caring whether the product is good and is simply producing it because the alternative not producing it, admitting that the thing he devoted his life to is no longer worthy of devotion, is worse than whatever the current state of things is. He has appeared visibly impaired during broadcast. He has made references to his personal problems that no producer with adequate oversight would have let through. The show persists because the children of Springfield love it, because Bart Simpson in particular loves it with a completeness and a loyalty that the show treats with genuine respect. Bart's love for Krusty is one of the most interesting things in the series, because it is not ironic. Bart is a character constitutionally resistant to sentimentality, allergic to the forms without the substance, quick to see through performances that other characters accept without examination. And yet Krusty he loves. Fully, directly, without the protective layer of irony. What Bart is responding to, the show suggests, is something that gets at why Krusty persists despite everything. The act, the falling, the getting up, the physical comedy of a man enduring things no sensible person would endure and presenting it as entertainment is a portrait of survival, of continuing to show up, of doing the thing you came to do even when the doing of it is undignified and painful and probably bad for you. Bart, who survives things daily by force of will and shamelessness, recognizes this. He comes back tomorrow. He will be there. He will put on the face and pick up the rubber chicken and electrocute himself for the children in the studio audience and for the children watching at home. And the children will laugh, and somewhere in Krusty's body, in the part of him that still knows the difference between the painted grin and the real one, something will hear that laughter and take it in. And somewhere under the white grease paint, Herschel Krustofsky is still there, still remembering his father, still wondering, in the quiet moments between takes, whether the rabbi would finally understand. Whether the laughter, all of it, from all of those children, across all of those years is something worth having given so much for. The show does not answer this question. Neither does Krusty. He puts out the cigarette. He picks up the rubber chicken. He goes back to work. Chief Wiggum, the system in a uniform. There is a version of Chief Clancy Wiggum that is easy to understand and easy to dismiss. The incompetent cop, the lazy authority figure, the joke badge on the wrong chest, a character who exists to demonstrate that the systems designed to protect a community can be occupied by people who are structurally inadequate to the occupying. He eats too many donuts. His gun falls out of his holster at unpredictable moments. He misidentifies suspects with a confidence that should have disqualified him from the position years before the series started. He arrives at crime scenes and asks questions that establish he has not understood what has happened. He files reports that document, in official language, his failure to document the relevant information. When Springfield needs law enforcement, it gets Chief Wiggum, and the result is invariably a situation that is at least marginally worse than the one that existed before law enforcement arrived on the scene. This version of Wiggum is genuinely funny. The show has squeezed an enormous amount of comedy from it across 36 seasons, and the comedy has not worn out because the premise is both specific this particular man, this particular failure, and universal, pointing towards something true about the relationship between institutions and the individuals who staff them. But underneath the joke is something the show has been quietly honest about for a long time. Chief Wiggum is not a bad man. He is an inadequate one, which is a different and in some ways more complex category. A bad man has a motive and an awareness he knows he is doing harm and continues. An inadequate man simply occupies a space larger than himself and produces consequences he does not fully track, because tracking them would require a sustained attention to cause and effect that his particular configuration does not reliably produce. He loves his son Ralph. This is the most important thing about Chief Wiggum. Not his policing record or his relationship with the Springfield criminal justice system or his various incompetencies documented across hundreds of episodes. The most important thing is that he has a son named Ralph, and he loves him completely and without qualification. Ralph Wiggum is, and the kindest way to put this is accurate rather than evasive, a child who operates on a frequency that is entirely his own. He says things that land as non sequiturs, and then, if you hold them in the air long enough, reveal a kind of internal logic that is wholly Ralph's, answering questions that nobody asked with an accuracy that is occasionally genuinely startling. My cat's breath smells like cat food. It is presented as a non sequitur. It is technically correct in a way that almost nothing else said in the scene is. It is the kind of observation that is obvious once it has been made and that nobody else in the room would have made, because the rest of the room is occupied with the conversation that the adults have decided is the important one, and Ralph is occupied with his cat. Clancy Wiggum finds all of this wonderful, not charming in the way of an adult performing tolerance for a child's limitations. Genuinely, immediately, without reservation wonderful. When Ralph says something that makes the room go quiet with the specific bafflement that Ralph produces, Clancy Wiggum does not look embarrassed. He does not quietly redirect. He looks at his son with the expression of a man who has been given, against all reasonable odds, exactly what he wanted, and who has not yet finished being grateful for it. This quality of parenting unconditional and unashamed, and entirely free of the performance of concern that most parents adopt when their child is not meeting expectations, is actually, when you consider it against the full range of Springfield parenting, one of the most genuinely healthy things the show depicts. Clancy does not need Ralph to be different. He does not need Ralph to be comprehensible to the people in the room who are not Clancy. He does not need Ralph to be more like the other children at Springfield Elementary, or to stop saying the things he says, or to manage his self-presentation in ways that would be easier for the adults around him. He needs Ralph to be Ralph, and Ralph is Ralph with a completeness and a consistency that satisfies both of them. There is a detail about Wiggum that is easy to miss in the density of the show's mythology, and easy to underestimate when you do catch it: his asthma. In the episode dealing with Mona Simpson's activist past, the episode that illuminates Homer's history and Burns's history, and the specific night in 1969 when a group of activists broke into a biological weapons laboratory and detonated an antibiotic bomb, one of the people present in the facility that night was a young Clancy Wiggum, working as a security guard. When the antibiotic bomb went off, Wiggum's chronic asthma, the condition he had been managing for years, was cured. The very act of political protest that made Mona Simpson a fugitive accidentally improved the health of the man who would eventually become Springfield's chief of police. The institution of law enforcement in Springfield owes its continued health literally in the lungs and the breathing capacity of its chief to the act of protest it exists to suppress. This is the kind of detail the show embeds without comment, trusting you to find it and sit with what it means. The irony is not in the text, it is in the structure. Springfield's law enforcement is, through Wiggum, a comedy about institutional inertia in the specific and accurate sense. The tendency of institutions to persist not because they are working, but because no one has organized the energy and the political will to change them. The badge is real. The authority is real. The jurisdiction is real. The results are not reliably real in the ways that the badge and the authority and the jurisdiction are supposed to produce. And the people of Springfield navigate around this gap with the adaptive resourcefulness that they bring to all of Springfield's structural failures, by managing on their own, by working around the official infrastructure rather than through it, by trusting that Chief Wiggum will arrive eventually, and by having already handled things by the time he does. Wiggum, to his credit, is usually willing to stay out of the way. He does not have the temperament of the aggressive incompetent who makes things worse through enthusiasm. He has the temperament of the comfortable incompetent who makes things worse through the absence of useful intervention. There is a difference, and the difference matters. The comfortable incompetent is at least not adding energy to bad situations. His wife Sarah is mostly in the background of the show, present in glimpses, characterized more through her relationship to Clancy than through her own independent interiority. What we see of the Wiggum household is warmer than the marriage of the town's most prominent law enforcement official might suggest, domestic and comfortable and not in conflict, held together by the easy warmth of two people who have found their shared rhythm and are not fighting the rhythms they produce together. Ralph thrives there. In the way Ralph thrives, which is to say he exists in the fullness of himself without modification or apology, he draws things. He makes observations. He says the things that occur to him to say, which are always the things that occur to Ralph and no one else. And his father receives all of it with the same expression. The expression of a man who has been given, against all reasonable odds, exactly what he wanted. At the end of his shift, Wiggum drives the police cruiser home at a speed slightly under the posted limit because the suspension has been making a sound for 3 weeks that he keeps meaning to have looked at. He hangs up his badge. He sits down at the kitchen table. Ralph has drawn something on the table with a purple crayon. A fish, or a cloud, or possibly both simultaneously, which is a thing that only makes sense in Ralph's world and makes complete sense there. "I drew you, Dad," Ralph says. And Clancy Wiggum looks at the drawing. He keeps it. Mona Simpson, the mother who stayed away. There is a specific grief that has no adequate name. The grief of children who grew up without one parent. Not through death, which has its rituals and its language and its community of people who have also lost, and who know, at least, what loss looks like and what it is called. Not through a clean departure that could be understood as a decision, a rejection, a clarity of loss that comes with its own terrible simplicity, but through a vanishing, through a parent who was there and then was not, whose absence was explained by a story that turned out not to be true, whose love was real and whose reasons were impossible, and who became, over time, more of a story than a person, more of a shape in the missing than an actual face that the child could remember with accuracy. Homer Simpson grew up with this grief. He could not name it. He did not have the word grief available to him in this context, because his mother was supposed to be dead. Dead people are mourned. A mother who died when you were young leaves a specific kind of absence that the culture has language for, that can be acknowledged and named and processed, however imperfectly, through the existing frameworks of loss. But a mother who is alive somewhere, living a life you know nothing about, choosing for reasons you have never been given to be somewhere other than with you. There is no clean ritual for this. There is only the gap where she should have been, and the filling of the gap with whatever is available, and the slow accumulation of a compensating personality built around the fact of an absence that was never explained. Homer filled it with food and with Marge and with the orange couch and with 36 years of finding something to hold on to, something immediate and warm and present in the way that his mother was not. He did not know he was doing this. He did not have the self-awareness to trace the shape of his compensation. He simply lived with a hunger that was not quite physical, and a need for warmth that was not quite rational, and a terror of abandonment that surfaced most clearly in the episodes where Marge threatened to leave, or where the family was, genuinely in danger of being separated. Mona Simpson's story, when it finally arrived in Season 7, was the show at its most genuinely ambitious, the episode asking the audience to do something that television does not often ask, which is to understand a person they have been missing for 6 years and who comes to them laden with the weight of an absence they were only beginning to understand. The episode is called Mother Simpson, and it handles its material with a care and a seriousness that the subject requires. She was a housewife, she was married to Abe, she had a young son named Homer, she was, by any outward accounting, ordinary, a woman living a quiet life in Springfield while the world outside was burning through the civil rights movement and the counterculture and the protests against a war that was killing people every day at a distance that made it feel both urgent and unreachable. And then something in her reached toward the urgency. She was radicalized, in the way that people are radicalized, by the specific combination of genuine injustice and available community. She found people who were doing something, who had decided that the ordinary life was not an adequate response to what was happening, who offered her a way to act. She joined a group of activists. They targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns, and the show, placing this detail quietly in the episode and not underlining it, is making a point about what kind of man Burns was, and has always been, that he would have a germ warfare facility operating in the same town where children were going to school and families were having dinner, and nobody outside the facility knew what was inside it. The group broke in. They released an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agent stored in the facility. The raid was successful. The danger was neutralized. And then Mona made a mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had fallen in the chaos. That someone was Mr. Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, and Burns saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact Abe without risking his exposure. She could not hold her son or explain to him or say goodbye in any way that would help him understand. She kissed Homer while he was sleeping and disappeared into the night. And Homer woke up the next morning in a house that was missing the most fundamental thing, and Abe told him she was dead. Homer spent the next 27 years believing he was unloved. Not believing his mother had made an impossible choice, not believing she had been forced away by circumstances she could not control, not even believing she was dead in a way that allowed for the fullness of grief, believing, at the level of a child's interpretation, that she had left, that he was the kind of son a mother would prefer to leave, that there was something wrong with him, something fundamental and unnameable that made people go. This belief shaped everything about Homer. His desperate need for approval, his clinginess toward Marge, his terror of abandonment, which surfaces most clearly in the episodes where the marriage is threatened. His willingness to endure humiliation from Mr. Burns, from the very man who drove his mother away rather than risk the loss of his employment, which is also the loss of his identity as someone who provides for his family, which is also the loss of the proof that he is not someone people leave. When they found each other, Homer and Mona, at a cemetery, among the headstones of people who had actually died, beside a stone that Abe had borrowed from a famous poet to stand in for the wife, he could not tell his son the truth about the reunion, was what reunions of this kind are. Insufficient to the weight of what they are carrying, inadequate to the years, genuine in a way that the inadequacy cannot touch. She did not recognize him immediately. He had changed. He had grown into the person he became in her absence. But when Homer proved who he was, they had something. Imperfect, insufficient, real. And then she had to go again. Burns spotted her. The FBI came. Homer stood at the door of his house and watched his mother leave for the second time. And this time he knew why she was leaving, not because of him, not because of anything lacking in him, but because of the man who signed his paycheck. Burns drove Mona away when Homer was a child. Burns is still driving her away when Homer is an adult. And Homer, too damaged by the years of the lie to fully connect these dots, watches her go. He does not quit his job. He does not confront Burns. He does not do the thing that a person with full access to their own history would be more likely to do: trace the line from the man who stole his mother to the man who still employs him, and refuse to be employed by that man anymore. Homer does not connect the dots. His brain, in its particular fog, is not built for that kind of sustained historical reasoning. And Burns, knowing this, has always known this, continues to employ him. Because a man who cannot see the architecture of his own suffering is the perfect employee. A man who will not connect the dots is a man who will not quit. Mona Simpson died in a later season. She came back once more, in the end, and then she was gone for the last time, and Homer sat beside her, and the show allowed the scene to be only what it was. No jokes, no cutaway, no reset. A son at his mother's side, at the end, with everything that had been lost between them, and everything that had been found, and the insufficient time remaining for any of it to be resolved in the way that the years required. She deserved more time. She did not get it. But in the episodes where she appeared, she was real. Glenn Close brought her a dignity and a warmth that the role required and that the audience deserved. And Homer, who was told his mother was dead, who grew up with a grief he could not name for a loss that was not what he was told, Homer got to know. He got to know that she had loved him. He got to know that the leaving was not his fault. He got to know that the absence was not because he was unlovable. That is not everything, but it is not nothing. In a life as full of gaps and losses as Homer Simpson's life, it is not nothing at all. Springfield itself, the town that holds everything. You cannot find Springfield on a map. This is not an accident or an oversight or the result of the show's writers being disorganized about geography. It is a choice, maintained deliberately and consistently across 36 years of episodes, renewed with each new season in which a new geographic clue appears only to be contradicted by another. Springfield is in the north. Springfield is in the south. It has an ocean and also mountains and also a desert within reasonable driving distance. Its state abbreviation has been shown as NT, which does not correspond to any actual American state. Its area code has pointed toward Missouri. Its climate has ranged from blizzard-capable to tropical within the span of a single season's episodes. Its borders, when stated, have placed it adjacent to Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky in different episodes, a geographic impossibility that the show commits to without apology. Matt Groening named it after Springfield, Oregon, and admitted as much in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery was considered solved. Then the show continued, and the writers continued not honoring the resolution, and new episodes placed Springfield in contexts inconsistent with Oregon. And the mystery reassembled itself, because the mystery was always more important than the answer. The answer would close something. The mystery keeps something open. Springfield is everywhere because it was designed to be yours. This is the functional explanation, the one the creators give when asked, the one that is true as far as it goes. We wanted the town to feel universal. We wanted every viewer to be able to look at Springfield and see the town they came from, or a version of it, or something that rhymes with it that has the same quality of familiar ordinariness, the same specific textures of small to medium American civic life, regardless of whether the viewer's actual hometown is in the Pacific Northwest, or the Deep South, or the Midwest, or the Northeast, or the Desert Southwest. Springfield, the most common city name in America, was chosen precisely for its genericness. It is a name that belongs to everywhere, rather than somewhere, and a town that belongs to everywhere rather than somewhere belongs to everyone. But what Springfield actually is, underneath the geography, is a portrait of something that American towns share regardless of their coordinates. The industrial employer that defines the local economy and therefore defines the local reality in ways that extend far beyond the workplace into the politics, into the environment, into the social relationships, into the unspoken agreements about what gets noticed and what gets overlooked. The school that is perpetually underfunded in ways that the people closest to it have long since stopped being scandalized by, because the underfunding has become the baseline. The bar where the same people sit at the same positions every evening, finding in repetition a kind of comfort that more dramatic social environments cannot provide. The church where the same people appear every Sunday, maintaining through habit and genuine belief, and the specific social architecture of small communities, the practice of gathering, the local television station, the local newspaper, the local political scene, with its predictable cast and its predictable dynamics and its predictable outcomes. The texture of a community that has been together long enough to have developed its own myths and its own shame and its own collective forgetting of the things it would prefer not to remember. Springfield is a company town. This is the most important structural fact about it, more important than its geography and more revealing than any of the individual secrets of its residents. The nuclear power plant does not simply employ a large portion of Springfield's workforce. It is the economic center of gravity around which the entire town orbits. The electricity comes from there. The primary source of employment comes from there. The wealth that sustains the local economy and the local political class and the local tax base that funds the school and the police and the fire department and all the other things that require public money, this wealth, ultimately traces back to that cracked facility on the hill with the cooling towers that have been patched with chewing gum, which means that Mr. Burns is not simply the richest man in Springfield. He is the condition of Springfield's possibility. The town functions because he allows it to function. The lights are on because he decides they should be on. And in exchange for the lights and the jobs and the continued viability of a community that would struggle to sustain itself without the plant, the town accepts implicitly, never stated, never formally agreed to but understood, in the way that all implicit agreements are understood certain arrangements that it would prefer not to examine too closely. The three-eyed fish, the cracked cooling towers, the safety inspector who sleeps at his desk, the water that goes untested, the environmental questions that go unasked by the town's official bodies. The periodic disasters that resolve before anyone has organized enough to demand accountability. These are the costs, and the town pays them because the alternative, the accounting, the reckoning, the admission that the arrangement has been damaging them, is a cost they have collectively decided they cannot afford. Most Springfield residents make this decision without noticing they are making it. That is how it works. That is how all implicit agreements work. The reset is the town's most remarkable feature, and once you have noticed it, you cannot unnotice it. Springfield has been destroyed, sealed under a federal dome, had the sun blocked from it, lost its principle to an identity revelation that the whole community witnessed, experienced nuclear near misses and environmental catastrophes, and alien encounters and the literal blocking of sunlight. And every time, by the next episode, Springfield is fine. The memory is clean. The buildings are rebuilt. The principal has the same name and the same mother and the same institutional history as before the revelation, because the town voted to prefer the useful fiction over the awkward truth, and the judge issued a decree making the fiction official, and anyone who objects to this arrangement is invited to leave. This is not simply episodic television's reset button. The show is too smart for that explanation to be sufficient. The reset is a character trait of the town itself, the thing Springfield does in the same way that Homer stumbles forward, or Marge manages, or Bart performs, or Lisa argues. Springfield forgets. It votes to forget. It makes the forgetting official, legal, enforced. And then it continues. The predictions deserve a mention here because they are part of how we understand what Springfield is. The Trump presidency, anticipated in 2000. The Disney acquisition of Fox, the smartwatch, the pandemic, the Cypress Hill and London Symphony Orchestra collaboration. The list is long and widely circulated, and the internet has made it feel like prophecy. But the writers of the show, staffed by extraordinarily educated people, Harvard graduates and PhD holders, and specialists in mathematics and science and political theory, were not prophets. They were readers of the present, which is sometimes the same thing. They observed trends that were already in motion and extrapolated them with the specific form of satirical intelligence that the show has always deployed to their logical conclusions. They read where America was going and wrote down what they saw. And here is the quieter version of the same observation. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was heading. Springfield is a diagnosis of where America already was. The nuclear plant run by an ancient billionaire with no meaningful accountability. The safety inspector hired specifically because his incompetence ensures that the violations continue rather than being corrected. The town that knows at some level that something is wrong but finds it more comfortable to keep the lights on than to demand the accounting that the situation requires. These are not fantastical elements of a cartoon universe. These are structural features of a country that the show looked at clearly and described without flinching. Springfield isn't a fantasy, it is a mirror. And the discomfort of watching it, the specific discomfort of recognition, of seeing something familiar rendered in yellow and named and given a fictional address, is the show doing its job. The floating timeline is the show's thesis statement, its deepest formal commitment, its most honest formal claim about what it is. The characters do not age because aging would mean ending. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8, Maggie has been 1, Homer and Marge have not gained a wrinkle. The year advances, the technology in the show updates, the cultural references shift. The present always reflects the viewer's present, but the characters remain frozen at the ages they were when the show began. Ending would mean admitting that the version of American family life that The Simpsons represents messy, warm, structurally unstable, emotionally real, held together by love that is inadequate to its situation and sufficient for its purpose, is not permanent. That the couch will eventually be empty. That Bart will grow up and the rebellion will become something else or be put away. That Lisa will move to a city that can hold her and the saxophone will fill a different room. That Maggie will speak, finally, and what she says will be worth 36 years of waiting, and then she will grow past the needing to be held. The show refuses this. The refusal is an act of mercy. Not toward the characters, who are fictional, but toward us, toward the audience that has been watching for 36 years and that needs, on some level that is more than just habitual, for the family to still be on the couch, still intact, still imperfect and warm and entirely, recognizably themselves. Because that family on that couch is ours, because we built the loop that keeps them there. Because we keep coming back, and our coming back is what sustains them, and their sustaining is what sustains us, and the loop has been running since December of 1989 and shows no sign of stopping. Springfield will not be found on any map. It is already where you live. The secondary world of Springfield. There are people in Springfield we have not fully examined. The characters who populate the edges of the show, who appear in the background of every crowd scene, who carry their own episodes occasionally and their own secrets always, and who, accumulated across 36 years, form a portrait of a town that is richer and stranger than any single character study can account for. Let us move through them slowly. Mo Sislak. His bar is sticky in a way that has stopped being a hygiene concern and become a condition of the space, like the particular smell of old wood or the way certain rooms have a quality of accumulated time that nothing can clean away. Its decor has not been updated in decades, which has moved it from dated to vintage to something approaching archaeological layers of Springfield's past, preserved in the specific patina of a bar that has stopped trying to be anything other than what it is. The regulars sit at the same positions with the reliability of people who have nowhere better to be and have, over time, stopped minding this, which is a form of peace, or at least a form of equilibrium that functions similarly. Mo himself tends bar with the weary expertise of someone who has been watching humanity from bar height for a very long time and who has arrived at specific, not particularly optimistic conclusions about what he has seen. He has tried to leave. He has tried to improve the bar, to renovate, to rebrand, to pivot toward food service or something more upscale, to transform the sticky floor institution into something that might attract a different kind of customer and therefore a different chapter of his life. None of it has stuck. He comes back to the bar. He comes back to the familiar regulars and the familiar routines and the phone calls from Bart Simpson, which he still takes after all this time, presumably because even the prank calls are a kind of company, or at least someone on the other end of the line. His self-pity is enormous and consistent and somehow not alienating, which is a remarkable achievement. The show gives Mo access to genuine vulnerability beneath the surliness, a capacity for feeling that his social presentation consistently buries, but that surfaces in the right episodes, in the right moments, with a specificity and an honesty that makes him sympathetic without requiring that you like him. He is not always likable. He is often not likable, but he is real, which is a more durable quality than likable, and in some ways more impressive to create. Barney Gumble. The show's most sustained portrait of a life arrived at through a long series of small decisions that individually seemed manageable and that collectively produced a man sleeping in the back booth of Moe's. He was, before the first beer that Homer gave him, a promising student. The show establishes this in a single episode with a single piece of evidence, a photograph, a grade. The before and the simplicity of the revelation makes it more devastating than any extended dramatic treatment would. Here is what was possible. Here is what became instead. Then Homer gave him a beer. What the show does not do with Barney, to its considerable credit, is treat him as a lesson. He is not a cautionary tale deployed to warn the audience about the consequences of bad choices. He is a person who lives in his situation, the way people live in their situations inside it, carrying it, navigating around its specific constraints as they present themselves day to day, with occasional moments of real clarity and real warmth that the situation does not eliminate. He has good days. He has moments when the sweetness that alcohol cannot reach is visible, when the person he was before and the person he is now briefly coincide. Those moments do not resolve the larger situation. They exist within it and remind you that the situation does not contain the whole person. Abraham Simpson occupies the retirement castle with the specific dignity of a man who has decided that if the world insists on marginalizing him, he will insist on the world's attention anyway. He tells stories. He has always told stories. He has been telling stories since before he was old. And the transition from young Abe telling stories to old Abe telling stories is less a transformation than a continuation, the same fundamental activity, now carrying the additional freight of an audience that has decided, in advance, that what an old man has to say is probably not relevant to their situation. He was young once. This is the fact that the flashback episodes work hardest to make real, because without the reality of the young Abe, the old Abe functions only as comedy. He was a soldier. He served in a war whose moral ambiguities the show has never been interested in pretending away. He was a husband. He was a father. He had, in his time, a full and complex life that moved forward through the days with the same urgency and uncertainty and hope that any life carries in its active period. He misses Mona. The show is clear about this in the episodes that address it, clear in the way that it is clear about the things it considers most important, not through extended emotional performance, but through small, specific details that carry the weight without drawing attention to themselves. Abe told Homer his mother was dead because the truth was a truth he did not know how to tell, could not find the words for, could not deliver in the form that it deserved. He made a choice. He lived with it. He has been living with it for the years since, in the retirement home, telling stories to whoever will sit still long enough, carrying the specific weight of someone who kept a secret for decades and who has, in the keeping, been kept by it too. Bart visits. More often than Homer, with more patience, which is saying something, because patience is not Bart's characteristic quality, but Bart sits down. He listens to the stories. He may not follow them entirely. His mind is forward-looking in ways that his grandfather's stories, rooted in decades past, do not always accommodate, but he is there. And Abe, who has experienced so much not being there from the people who are supposed to be there, registers the being there of his grandson with a warmth that the stories don't quite capture. Nelson Muntz is a bully who is a bully because the conditions that produce alternatives to bullying were not provided. His mother is absent in the ways that can mean many things and usually mean something difficult. His home life is chaos. He is, effectively, on his own in the ways that produce a specific combination of resourcefulness and cruelty. The resourcefulness of someone who has learned to manage without support, and the cruelty of someone who has learned that the world is not reliably kind, and who has gotten ahead of this discovery by not being reliably kind first. The laugh, ha-ha, delivered with a pointing finger at someone else's misfortune, is his signature and his armor simultaneously. He laughs because the laugh keeps the misfortune from landing too close to him. If you can direct it outward, if you can be the one pointing, rather than the one being pointed at, the misfortune belongs to someone else for the duration of the pointing. He loves Lisa, in the way that children love complicated things, fully, briefly, with no adequate language for what the feeling is. The episodes that explore their unlikely connection are among the show's most tender, because they show both of them at their most unguarded. Lisa, outside the performance of competence, Nelson outside the performance of toughness, two children who are both, in different ways, managing situations that no child should have to manage alone, finding in each other a few minutes of not having to manage. Martin Prince is brilliant and victimized, and occasionally, in the way of people who have been hurt enough, capable of petty cruelties that he would not commit in a better situation. He is, in the social architecture of Springfield Elementary, a figure that the school's structures have placed in the position of the target, the one who is too eager, too earnest, too willing to demonstrate his intelligence in a context that does not reward intelligence the way it rewards other qualities. He and Lisa are not friends in the easy sense, but they are connected by the specific bond of people who have been placed in similar positions by a similar set of circumstances, and who recognize in each other the particular loneliness of that placement. The town's newspaper, the Springfield Shopper, covers local events with the combination of genuine local journalism and the specific blind spots of an institution that has been operating in the same community for long enough to have developed an instinctive sense of which stories are and are not appropriate to pursue. The plant safety record, the questions about the water, the health of the population over time. These are not stories the shopper pursues with the vigor that they warrant. The absence of that pursuit is itself a kind of local news, available to anyone who thinks to look for what is not there. And Evergreen Terrace itself, the street, the specific block. The houses that face each other across the road, Homer and Marge and their family on one side, Ned and his family on the other, with the white fence between them that Homer has damaged in at least 3 documented ways across the show's run. The street is the show's primary spatial metaphor. The relationship between these two households, lived out across a fence that separates and connects simultaneously, is the show's most sustained examination of the gap between how we try to live and how we actually live. Ned is on one side of the fence. Homer is on the other. Neither of them has ever, not once, suggested that the fence should come down. The fence stays. The street continues. The town persists, imperfect and warm and entirely itself. The couch, the credits, and what they have always meant. The couch gag. Every episode of The Simpsons begins with the couch gag. The family Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie races from the left side of the screen toward the living room, and then something happens. The couch does something unexpected. The family arrives to find the couch already occupied by strangers, or to find no couch at all, or to find themselves transformed before they reach it. The family is pixelated. The family becomes paintings. The family is crushed by something falling from above. The family does what the couch gag needs them to do this week, which is something different from what it needed them to do last week and the week before. The only rule being that whatever happens, the routine is disrupted. The expected arrival at the familiar place is interrupted by the unexpected. For 36 years, the couch gag has been the show's opening ceremony, its moment of deliberate formal play, its weekly reminder that the thing you are watching does not follow the normal rules, that Springfield operates by its own logic, and that you have entered it by agreeing to be surprised even by the familiar. The couch gag says, you know this family, you know this house. You know the couch and the television and the lamp and the routine. And still, something will be different from what you expected. Still, the show has something to offer you that you have not seen before. The variations are endless and have encompassed everything from 2-second visual gags to 4-minute films, to elaborate references to art history, to guest animators doing the sequence in their own visual style. Some of the couch gags are among the most formally inventive things the show has ever produced, more inventive, in some cases, than the episodes they introduce. The show has used the couch gag to say things it cannot say in the episode proper, to acknowledge the show's own history, to be self-aware in the specific way that a show can only be self-aware when it has been running long enough to have a history worth being aware of, and then the family lands on the couch, and the episode begins. The couch, in this ritual, is not just furniture. It is the destination. It is what the opening credits are racing toward. The family, scattered across their various days, Homer at the plant, Marge at the store or the school or wherever the morning required, Bart having escaped from something that was probably school, Lisa at band practice or at her desk or in conversation with a book, Maggie in the care of someone else, all of them racing back to the one place where they are together. The place that is theirs. The couch holds them all. This is what the show has always been about, underneath everything else it has been about. The radiation theory and the floating timeline and the immortal billionaire and the genius baby and the predictions and the mysteries, these are the conditions. They are the texture of Springfield, the specific form that the chaos of ordinary life takes in this particular town. They are interesting and worth examining, as we have examined them. But the point is the couch. The point is the family arriving together, in the same place, at the same time. The point is the living room, with its warm lamp and its orange furniture and its television showing something that Homer will half-watch, and Marge will tolerate, and Bart will mock, and Lisa will critique, and Maggie will observe, all of them together, doing the most ordinary thing in the world. Being in the same room. You might think this is a small thing. You might think, having grown up in the era of the second screen and the phone in the hand and the simultaneous separate digital lives that people lead even when they are physically together, the togetherness that is technically true and experientially thin, that the image of a family on a couch watching television is not the stuff of meaning. That it is, if anything, a portrait of passivity and disconnection, the family not talking but watching, the shared experience being mediated through the screen rather than lived directly between them. But The Simpsons has been making a different case for 36 years, quietly and without grand proclamation, through the accumulated weight of every episode. Being in the same room matters. The physical togetherness matters. The shared watching, even when what is being watched is not particularly important, even when the conversation is not particularly deep, even when Homer is asleep before the credits finish rolling, this matters. It is the house being inhabited rather than merely occupied. It is the family choosing, in the most basic and physical sense, to be in the same place. The show has imagined its characters aging, has done it multiple times, in flash-forward episodes that glimpse possible futures. In season 6, Lisa's wedding shows a Lisa in her 20s, engaged, accomplished, having become the kind of person the show always suggested she would become. The future is detailed and specific and emotionally rich. It is also sealed off at the end of the episode. Lisa returns to being 8 years old. The couch gag plays, the theme song sounds, and the permanent present resumes as though the glimpse never happened. The show can imagine the characters growing up. It chooses not to let them. Not because the show cannot handle the future, because we cannot handle it. Because the audience that has been watching since 1989 or 1997 or 2005 or whenever you personally arrived at Springfield cannot handle, on some level, the acknowledgement that the family will eventually dissolve the way all families dissolve, not through catastrophe, simply through time, through the children becoming adults and the adults becoming old and the house on Evergreen Terrace eventually belonging to someone else. We cannot handle it, and so the show does not deliver it, and the characters remain at the ages they were, and we come back every Sunday, the feeling. That is what all of it, the 788 episodes, the 36 seasons, the couch gags and the theme songs and the celebrity appearances and the predictions and the mysteries and the secondary characters and the cracked cooling towers and the three-eyed fish is in service of the feeling of sitting on a couch and turning on the television and knowing that Springfield will be there, exactly as it was, exactly as it always is. The yellow family in the familiar house on the familiar street in the town that doesn't appear on any map and that is therefore everywhere, that belongs to everyone who has ever needed it. You know the theme song? You know it in the body, the way you know things that were absorbed early enough to become part of your own architecture. The particular ascending line at the end, the shot of the town from above, the sequence of the family converging from their various days, the couch gag, the episode. You have watched this beginning so many times that you could assemble it in your memory in complete detail, right now, with your eyes closed. Close your eyes. It is there. It has always been there. What the show means, finally. Let us address, at last, what The Simpsons actually means, not what it is about. We have been doing that through every section of this script, examining the layers and the theories and the character portraits and the social observations and the mysteries that the show has spent 3 decades building. What a show is about is many things, as all sufficiently large works of art are about many things, and we have worked through most of them. But meaning is different from subject matter. A work's meaning is not its content. Its meaning is what it finally deposits in you, the residue left in the space between the last image and the darkness after the screen goes off. The thing that stays when everything else, the plot and the jokes and the specific details, has faded. The Simpsons meaning its final, deepest, most persistent meaning, the one that 36 seasons and hundreds of episodes and 30-plus years of collective cultural engagement have built together is this. It is possible to love imperfectly, and for that love to be enough. Homer is imperfect. He has always been imperfect. He is imperfect in ways that are genuinely funny and in ways that are genuinely sad and in ways that fall in the space between those two things where most real human imperfection actually lives. His love for his family is not the love of a perfect man. It is not the love of a man who has thought carefully about what love requires and is reliably delivering those requirements. It is the love of the man he is stumbling, distracted, fog-brained, warm, and that love, which is inadequate to almost every standard by which love might be assessed, somehow holds, somehow sustains, somehow produces in the people who receive it the thing that adequate love is supposed to produce, the feeling of being loved. Marge is imperfect. Her love expresses itself as management, as anxiety, as the control that is the form her caring takes and the form her fear takes simultaneously. She manages the people she loves partly to protect them and partly to protect herself from the fear of what happens when things go unmanaged. This is real. This is recognized. This is not the love described in the language of romance, or the language of self-help, or the language of any description of love that leaves out the fear underneath it. And the love holds anyway. The management continues, imperfect and sustaining, day after day. Bart is imperfect in the ways that children are imperfect when the world has not given them what they needed, when the systems around them have looked at who they are and offered frameworks designed for someone else and called the Failure to fit those frameworks the child's problem. He is performing a version of himself that protects the version underneath. And the performance is imperfect, and the protection is imperfect, and the version underneath is more delicate than the performance suggests. And the love holds. He keeps coming home. He keeps being, under everything, a member of this family. Not because the family is perfect, but because it is his. Lisa is imperfect in the ways of people whose gifts have been too large for their context, who have been shaped by an environment that could not quite hold what they were, and who have had to do a great deal of compensating internal work to remain intact. Her love for her family is one of the most complicated in the show because it requires her to hold together two things simultaneously: the clarity of her intelligence, which sees the limitations of the family and the household and the town quite precisely, and the love that persists despite and through that clarity, that does not require the limitations to be resolved before the love is extended. She loves Homer, knowing what Homer is. She loves Springfield, knowing what Springfield is. She keeps the love anyway. Maggie is watching. Maggie has always been watching. And if Maggie's silence contains something, an intelligence, a judgment, a patient waiting for the moment when speaking is right, then perhaps the silence itself is a form of love. The love that observes and does not rush to fix. The love that is patient enough to wait. They are all imperfect. And the love holds, not because it is the right kind of love, validated by the appropriate authorities, delivered in the correct forms, consistent with the manual for how love should operate. It holds because they keep choosing it. Not every day in a conscious and deliberate way. Most days, the choice is not a choice but simply what they do, simply the direction they continue moving in because the other direction is not available to them. But in the moments when it matters, in the episodes where the choice is genuine and the stakes are real, they choose it. Homer comes home. Marge stays. Bart shows up. Lisa keeps caring. Maggie watches over all of them with those enormous eyes. The choice, repeated. The love, sustained through the repetition. This is what the show is made of. There is a thing the show has taught us, quietly and by accumulation over 36 years, that is not in any episode's specific content. That paying attention to fiction is a form of paying attention to real things. The Yellow Family and the cartoon Springfield and the impossible physics and the floating timeline, none of this prevents the emotional content from being real. The grief of Homer finding his mother is real grief. The loneliness of Lisa in the schoolyard is real loneliness. The complicated love of two people who should not work together and who have decided, every day for 36 years, to keep working, that is real love. The fiction is the vehicle. What it carries is real. The show gave us permission to feel things about animated people, and in doing so, it gave us access to feelings about our own lives that the directness of our own lives does not always make available. The distance of fiction creates a safety that the lived experience cannot always provide. You can cry at The Simpsons in a way that you cannot always cry at your own situation, because at The Simpsons the stakes are clear, and the emotions are labeled, and the resolution comes before the hour is up. Your own hour does not always resolve, but the show keeps going. And when your hour is difficult, when the resolution is not coming tonight, when the day has been the kind of day that needs company, there is something in the persistence of The Simpsons, in the reliable fact of them, in the Yellow Family on the couch and the theme song and the familiar house. That is a form of company. You are not alone in the hour. Springfield is on. The show is a container. What we bring to it is the content, the specific losses and loves and recognitions that we carry into every episode we watch, the Homer who reminds us of our father, the Marge who reminds us of our mother, the Bart who reminds us of who we wanted to be when we were young and angry and certain the world had made a fundamental error, the Lisa who reminds us of the part of ourselves that is still asking questions that the world finds inconvenient. These are our contributions to the show, and the show would be less without them. Springfield is not The Simpsons' creation alone. It is ours together. We built it with them. We have been building it since 1989. We keep building it every time we watch. That is a remarkable collaboration between fiction and audience to have sustained for 36 years. That is what the show means. The last night in Springfield. Let us take a final, slow walk through the town. It is late. Much later than the show usually takes place, The Simpsons runs in daylight and early evening, in the warmth of artificial light in the kitchen and the blue glow of the television in the living room, in the specific hours of a day that has things happening in it. But imagine Springfield at this hour, past all of that. The particular quiet of a town that has completed its day and is simply resting, the way towns rest, the way all occupied spaces eventually settle into their overnight state of potential, still containing everything they contain in the daytime, but with no one moving through it, the air thicker and quieter and somehow more present. Moe's is closed, the lights are off. The sticky floor is empty of the sticky glasses and the people who fill them, the last regular having navigated their way home an hour ago with the careful attention of someone who has had just enough to make the walk interesting. Moe has wiped down the bar not because cleanliness is an overriding concern, but because the wiping is the ritual that closes the day, the gesture that says this chapter of the working of the bar is done, and what comes next is the other part, the private part, the part where Moe is simply a person in a building above a bar, alone with whatever he is when he is not tending bar. He will be back down in the morning. The lights will come on, the stools will fill. The day will begin again with the sticky floor and the cold glass and the company that is not perfect but is present and has been present, more or less without interruption, for decades. The retirement castle is quiet. The residents are asleep. Abraham Simpson is in his bed with his memories arranged around him the way you arrange important things when you are storing them. Not forgotten, just in their place, available when needed. The memories of Mona. The memories of the war. The ones he has told and the ones he has not. The memories of being young, in the way that Abe was young, forward-moving, full of the specific confidence of someone who has not yet accumulated enough experience to know how many things can go wrong. He will have more stories in the morning. There will be fewer people to tell them to, but some, Bart might visit. Bart visits more than Homer does, which is something, which is more than nothing. The elementary school is dark. The desks are empty in the specific way of schools at night, the chairs tucked in, the board partially erased, the evidence of the day's teaching present in the fragments that remain. Mrs. Krabappel's classroom has the beginning of tomorrow's assignment on the board, written in her precise hand, the hand of someone who has been writing on boards for a long time and has developed the particular efficiency of the practiced. Lisa's seat is in the third row. Martin's is near the front. Bart's is wherever Bart's is, the location of it carrying the specific energy of a seat that is regularly vacated. The church is dark. The pews are empty. The stained glass holds the light that will come through it in the morning, but at this hour it is simply glass, simply color, simply the potential of something that requires the sun to actualize. Ned has been by today, as he has been by every day. He prays at home too, in the evening, in the part of the day that belongs to him and Rod and Todd, after the school pickups and the dinners and the homework and the bedtimes that Ned manages with the same deliberate care he brings to everything. He prays in the quiet. He does not expect the conversation that Homer has been given. He prays into the silence and finds in the silence what the silence, in his experience, reliably contains: the practice itself. The practice is enough. The power plant runs on its overnight crew. The skeleton staff that keeps the cooling towers cycling, the monitors reading, the cracked and patched and inadequately maintained facility, producing the electricity that flows down through the lines to the streetlights of Springfield, and through the walls of the houses, to the lamps and the refrigerators and the televisions. The overnight crew is not Homer. Homer is not here at this hour. Homer is where Homer is, which is where Homer always is at the end of the day. And on Evergreen Terrace, the houses sit in their quiet rows. In the house with the yellow family, everyone is asleep. Homer and Marge in their room, side by side in the way they have been, side by side for 36 years of episodes and whatever number of years the floating timeline implies before the first episode began. Marge's blue hair on the pillow with a height and a stability that defies the pillow's physics and that has, after so many years, ceased to be surprising and become simply part of the landscape of the room, part of what the room is when it contains both of them. Homer's arms somewhere near her. The sleep that comes, for Homer, with the completeness of someone who has expended himself fully in the day and who approaches the night with the uncomplicated surrender of a man who has nothing to hide from his own sleeping. Bart in his room. The skateboard against the wall, the ceiling above him accumulated with the stickers of someone who has been claiming this space as his own for decades. Each sticker, a record of something that mattered or seemed to matter, or whose exact significance has been forgotten but whose presence remains, a palimpsest of enthusiasms. He sleeps in the way of exhausted children, who have been moving all day, and who stop, when they stop, completely. The smirk is off his face. He is simply himself, in the dark, in the room that is his. Lisa in her room, the saxophone in its case by the desk, closed, resting. The books stacked by the bed with the precision of someone who has thought about the order they should be in. Her face at rest in the way that faces at rest always reveal something that the waking face contains and conceals, simultaneously the softness that the waking Lisa does not always have access to, in the classroom and the community and the conversations where being Lisa Simpson requires a kind of sustained effortfulness. Here, in the dark, in the room that is hers, she is simply asleep. The arguments are still. The saxophone is still. The interior monologue, which runs at speed through the waking hours, has quieted. She is 8 years old. She has always been 8 years old. And Maggie, small and present in her crib or near it, the pacifier in place, the enormous eyes closed. What does Maggie dream about? The show has never shown us. Has preserved Maggie's interior as the final private space in Springfield, the one thing that the audience does not have access to. But you can imagine it. You can imagine her dreaming about the butterfly from the short film, the way the light looked when the wings opened, and the creature that had been waiting inside the cocoon finally became what it had always been becoming. About the feeling of having protected something long enough and carefully enough for it to be ready to go. She sleeps. The house sleeps. And wherever you are, whatever city or town or apartment or house you are in, whatever time it is on your clock, whatever brought you to this particular piece of storytelling on this particular night, you can sleep too. Springfield will be here in the morning. It will be here next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, for as long as the show runs and for as long as the memory of the show runs, which in both cases is likely to be a very long time. The couch gag will play, the theme song will sound, Homer will barrel through the door just in time, and Marge will be there, and the kids will be there, and the episode will begin, and Springfield will be exactly where you left it. The family on the couch, the light on in the kitchen, the television on, the house holding everything it has always held, the love that is imperfect and real and enough, the family that was designed to represent something and became, over 36 years, the thing it was designed to represent, the home that is fictional and familiar and entirely yours. You built it. We built it. We have been building it together since December of 1989, and what we built is still standing, still warm, still there when you need it. The couch will hold you. Springfield will be here in the morning. It always is. That is the whole point. It always is. Further notes. The depth beneath the surface. There are things about these characters that we have touched on and not fully settled. Things the show has been saying, in its patient and oblique way, across 3 decades of Sunday evenings, that deserve a longer look. Let us go back through the family and the town and spend a little more time on Homer's relationship with time. Homer Simpson does not relate to time the way most people relate to time. Time, for most people, is a resource that depletes the sense that there is a finite amount of it, that the day is a container of limited capacity, that the choices made about what to put in the container have consequences that compound. People who relate to time this way are planners. They are anxious about the future. They are haunted by the past. They experience the present as a transitional state between what was and what will be, rarely as a destination in itself. Homer does not do this. Homer exists in the present with a completeness that is almost meditative, not because he has achieved some deliberate state of mindfulness, or because he has philosophically arrived at the value of presence. Homer is not a man who arrives at things philosophically. He exists in the present because his particular brain, whether by nature or by the accumulated effects of the radiation and the crayon and the decades at the plant, does not reliably maintain the narrative architecture of past and future that would allow him to experience the present as transitional. For Homer, right now is where things are. The couch is where he is. The beer is in his hand. The television is on. The family is nearby. These are the facts of the present, and the present is what is happening. This quality, which produces the forgetting of past disasters, the failure to anticipate future consequences, the inability to connect the dots between the thing he did on Tuesday and the thing that is happening now on Friday, is the source of an enormous amount of comedy in the show. It is also, the show occasionally admits, the source of an enormous amount of peace. Homer is not lying awake at 3 in the morning rehearsing past failures and anticipating future ones. He is not managing the psychological weight of a life's worth of accumulated regret. He gets in bed, he goes to sleep, and the night is simply the night. There is a reading of this quality that is dark, the radiation having damaged the part of his brain responsible for continuity and consequence, leaving him in a kind of enforced present that is less wisdom than injury. And there is a reading that is, if not exactly admirable, at least enviable, a man who lives where he is, who is where he is. The show holds both readings simultaneously and does not resolve them, which is the correct thing to do. On Marge's silences. Marge Simpson speaks a great deal in the show, is one of its most verbal characters. In fact, managing the household's ongoing conversation with the efficiency of someone who has recognized that communication is the essential technology of domestic life and who has developed considerable fluency in it. She communicates constantly with Homer and the children and the neighbors and the school and the town and herself. But Marge also has silences. Particular silences that are not the absence of speech, but the presence of something that speech would reduce. The hum, her habitual low humming when she is thinking, always the same note, the note she lands on when she is working something through, is the audio form of these silences. It is not thought made audible. It is the sound of thought happening, of Marge being with something, before she decides what to do about it. Her silences come in several varieties. There is the silence before she says something difficult. The brief pause in which Marge, who has learned through long experience that the words she chooses matter more than the words Homer chooses, because the listening on the other side is less reliable, assembles the communication with the care of someone who knows it has to land on the first attempt. There is the silence in which she is watching one of the children and deciding whether to intervene. Watching Bart heading towards something inadvisable and calculating, in real time, whether stopping him now produces a better outcome than letting the situation develop and addressing the consequences, a calculation she has been running since Bart was old enough to head toward inadvisable things, which was early, and there is the silence in which she is simply being Marge, without the management or the communication or the holding together. The silence of a woman who is, in the moment, not required to be anything or anyone in particular. These silences are short. The household fills them quickly, but they are there. In those silences, she is the person before the pearls and before the apron and before the blue hair and before the marriage and before the children, the person who stood in front of a canvas and painted something that made Ringo Starr feel seen. That person is always there, available, waiting in the silences for a moment that the household will eventually create. On Bart's loyalties, there is a hierarchy to Bart's loyalties that the show has established without being explicit about it, and understanding the hierarchy explains a great deal about why Bart behaves the way he does in different situations. At the top of the hierarchy, unquestioned, is the family. Not because Bart would say this, Bart would not say this. Bart would actively deflect from saying this with all the considerable energy he brings to deflecting from things that are true and emotionally relevant. But because in every episode where the family is genuinely threatened, Bart's response is immediate and total. He does not calculate. He does not assess whether the situation is worth his investment. He acts from the place in him where the loyalty lives before the performance of indifference can catch up. Below the family is Milhouse. Milhouse, who is loyal to Bart in ways that exceed what Bart deserves, who gives more than he gets and knows it and continues, because Milhouse is constitutionally unable to withdraw his loyalty from someone he has decided to be loyal to. And Bart, who exploits this quality and knows he exploits it and occasionally feels genuinely bad about exploiting it, is loyal to Milhouse in the specific and asymmetric way of someone who has decided that a particular person belongs in his circle and that this belonging is not contingent on Milhouse being useful or impressive or capable of keeping up. The loyalty is not announced. It is demonstrated in episodes, in moments, in the casual and reliable fact of Bart showing up when Milhouse needs him, not always in the ways that matter most, but in the ways that are available. He is there. He keeps being there. For Milhouse, who has had a great deal of not being there from the people who should have been there, this counts. On Lisa's future. The flash-forward episodes have shown us versions of Lisa's future that are, in their details, both specific and deliberately incomplete. She becomes president. She becomes a musician. She becomes the kind of adult that the 8-year-old Lisa was clearly going to become principled, accomplished, lonely in the specific way of people who are accomplished in arenas that have small memberships. What none of these futures shows is whether she was happy. The show is careful about this. It gives her achievement, and it gives her the recognition that Springfield could never provide, and it gives her the adulthood that the floating timeline prevents her from reaching. But happiness, the particular, daily, unspectacular happiness of someone who has found where they fit and who has stopped fighting the fit, the flash forwards leave ambiguous. Perhaps because the show doesn't know. Perhaps because Lisa's happiness is not something that can be projected forward from who she is at 8. It depends on too many variables, too many choices and encounters and contingencies that the show cannot anticipate. It depends on what Lisa does with the saxophone in her adult life, and with the activism, and with the intelligence that Springfield could not fully hold. It depends on whether she finds, somewhere in the world beyond Evergreen Terrace, the community of people who can meet her where she lives. The show hopes she does. The audience hopes she does. And in the meantime, she plays her saxophone in her room at 8 years old, and the night receives it, and she is, in the playing, completely herself. On Maggie's power. The question that the Maggie chapters of the show keep raising and never fully answering is what she will do with what she is. Not who she is. The show has been reasonably clear about who she is, or at least about the outlines of it. The intelligence, the patience, the strategic silence, the capacity for action that the baby exterior conceals. But what she will do, she has shown what she can do when the situation requires it. She has saved her family from multiple threats, in episodes where the threat was real enough that the adults could not handle it and the baby did. She has organized. She has protected. She has, on one significant occasion, shot a man. She has demonstrated, in the short film and in scattered episodes across the series, that her capabilities exceed her apparent developmental stage by a margin that should alarm anyone who is paying attention. No one in Springfield is paying attention. This is, of course, by design. But the question remains. The watching and the waiting and the patient accumulation of everything she has observed from the edges of the family's various dramas, all of it is building towards something. The show has been building it for 36 years. The something has not arrived yet. When it does, when Maggie decides that the moment is right, that the thing she has been waiting for has presented itself, that the silence has served its purpose, and what comes next is the speaking. Springfield will not see it coming. Nobody will. That is exactly how Maggie planned it. On Mr. Burns and what he has built, the empire of Charles Montgomery Burns is, when you examine its full extent, extraordinary in its self-referential completeness. He owns the plant that produces the power that lights the town, that employs the workers who operate the plant. He has corrupted the political infrastructure that would otherwise regulate the plant. He retains the lawyers who protect the plant from the legal challenges that the corruption occasionally fails to prevent. He funds the medical research that keeps him alive to maintain the empire. He employs Smithers, who manages all of it. The system is not just self-sustaining, it is self-defending. Every element of it is connected to every other element in a way that makes any single point of attack insufficient. You cannot simply shut down the plant. The town's economy depends on it. You cannot simply expose Burns. The political infrastructure he has built will absorb the exposure. You cannot simply remove Smithers. The entire operation will degrade without him in ways that would require years to recover from. You cannot simply outbid Burns for the town's loyalty. No one in Springfield has enough resources to make a competing offer. The only way to dismantle what Burns has built is to dismantle it from the inside, all at once, in a way that prevents the system from recovering through its own self-repair mechanisms. Springfield has never found the will to do this. Homer has never found the capacity to see the architecture of the thing he works inside. And Burns has never found a reason to stop. The empire continues. The cracked cooling towers exhale. The lights stay on. And somewhere in the enormous house, the oldest man in Springfield sleeps, or lies awake, or sits in the room with the bear, living the specific life of someone who has outlasted every reasonable expectation and who is not entirely sure what to do with the time that remains. On the show itself. Here is the thing about a show that has been running for 36 years. It contains multitudes in the most literal sense. The early seasons and the later seasons are different shows, produced by different groups of writers with different sensibilities and different relationships to the characters, operating in different cultural moments with different understandings of what the audience needed and what the show was capable of providing. And yet, the family is the same family. The couch is the same couch. The house on Evergreen Terrace has the same address and the same layout and the same quality of feeling, that particular warmth of a house that is occupied rather than merely inhabited, that has been lived in hard and loved and argued in and held together by the daily practice of the people inside it. The show has changed. The characters have remained. Not unchanged. They have been through hundreds of episodes of living, and that living has left traces, has built up the accumulated texture of a long life, even within the fiction of a floating timeline. But at their core, in the way they move through the world and toward each other, they are who they were. Homer still comes home. Marge is still there when he does. Bart is still performing and still hiding and still, underneath everything, the kid who feels things deeply and does not know how to say so. Lisa is still playing the saxophone in her room. Maggie is still watching. This is not stagnation. This is the show's deepest form of loyalty to the characters it built, to the audience that received them, to the 36 years of Sunday evenings that the two have shared. The show keeps faith with what it is. And what it is, underneath every couch gag, and every celebrity appearance, and every treehouse of horror, and every floating timeline, and every reset, is a family. The family that was designed to represent the American family. The family that became, through the alchemy of 36 years of watching and loving and returning, everyone's family, yours. What 36 years feels like from the inside. There is a particular quality to things that have been in your life for a very long time. Not the quality of newness. Newness is its own pleasure. The specific electricity of encountering something for the first time. The way the mind lights up when it meets something it has never met before and begins the work of understanding it. Newness is real and valuable and not what we are talking about. What we are talking about is the quality of the long familiar. The quality of the thing that has been there long enough to become part of the texture of how your life feels. Long enough that you would notice its absence the way you notice the absence of a sound that has been present so consistently that it stopped being audible as sound and became simply part of the acoustic environment of your life. The Simpsons has been in the lives of many people for 36 years. For some people, that is their entire lives, or close enough. For others, it is most of their adult lives. For the oldest portion of the audience, it spans childhood and adolescence and early adulthood and middle age, the full range of what a person goes through in the years when a person is actively going through things and finding, each time they look up from what they are going through, that the yellow family is still on the couch. This means that The Simpsons has been present for things, not as a cause, not as a participant, but as the show that was on during things. As the ambient presence, the Sunday night ritual, the constant against which the variables of actual life played out. People have watched The Simpsons the week a parent died, and the week a child was born, and the week they moved to a new city, and the week they lost their job, and the week they fell in love, and the week it ended, and every ordinary week in between when nothing specific happened and the week, nonetheless needed the 22 minutes of familiar yellow family and familiar orange couch. The show was there for all of it, not intervening, not solving, not providing the specific emotional support that those specific moments required. Simply being there, on the other side of the screen, running its familiar course through its familiar world, offering the specific comfort of the thing that continues, regardless. Some things do not continue regardless. People leave. Jobs end. Relationships collapse. Health changes. The world is full of things that were reliably present and then were not, that the body had factored into its understanding of what the landscape of life looks like, and that turn out to have been temporary in ways you did not anticipate. The Simpsons has continued regardless. This is not a small thing. The reliability of it, the Sunday night at 8 o'clock quality of it, the way you could turn on the television knowing what you would find. This has been a fact about certain people's lives for 3.5 decades. Facts about lives carry weight. They become part of the architecture of what life is. They shape the room that everything else happens in. Homer on the couch has been part of the room that many people's lives happen in. The donut, the orange couch, the blue hair, the cracked cooling towers on the skyline, the couch gag and the theme song in the episode. These are not just elements of a television show. They are furniture in the interior of millions of people's lives, present long enough to have become load-bearing. When you watch the show now, whenever now is for you, whatever season you are in, you are watching it with everything you watched it with before. The previous viewings are in the room with you. The child who first saw it if you were a child, the teenager, the young adult, the person you were during the hard year, and the person you were during the easy one. All of them are in the room with you, watching the same couch gag, and the watching is different because of who all of them were. This is what 36 years feels like from the inside. The accumulation. The layering of present over past until the thing you are watching, and the memory of watching it, and the memory of who you were when you were watching it are all present simultaneously, all available, all part of what the show is for you now. The show does not know this. Homer does not know this. The characters exist in their permanent present, knowing nothing of what happened before this episode or what will happen after it, carrying none of the weight that the audience carries into every viewing. That is perhaps the deepest form of the show's mercy. The characters are always here. They are always in the present. They never accumulate the weight. You can bring your entire history to the couch, all 36 years of it, and Homer will receive it with the same cheerful amnesia he brings to everything. The couch will hold whatever you bring. You can go home. You can always go home. The things the show never says directly. The Simpsons communicates through accumulation rather than statement. Its deepest meanings are rarely announced. They arrive through the repeated application of a detail, the quiet return of a theme across many episodes, the slow build of a portrait that the show never steps back and names. Here are some of the things the show has been saying across 36 years without saying. It has been saying that the working class is worth representing, that the people who operate the machinery of a country, who work in its plants and manage its households and serve behind its bars and teach in its schools are interesting, that their lives contain the full range of human experience, the comedy and the tragedy and the love and the loneliness, and that representing those lives with honesty and affection is a worthy thing for a television show to do. The Simpsons has been saying this since 1989, and the saying has not always been celebrated in the terms it deserves. The show is more often discussed in terms of its satire and its innovation and its longevity than in terms of its fundamental commitment to the dignity of ordinary American life. But the commitment is there. It is in every episode. It is in the fact that the richest man in Springfield is the villain and the plant worker who forgets his own name is the hero. It has been saying that love does not require competence, that you do not have to be good at the responsibilities that love carries in order for the love itself to be real and valuable and capable of sustaining the people who receive it. Homer is not good at most of what being a father requires. He is an unreliable provider in the sense that his employment is perpetually precarious. He is an inconsistent presence in the sense that his attention is not reliable. He is not equipped to help Lisa with her homework or to understand Bart's specific kind of struggling or to give Maggie the dedicated sensory stimulation that developmental literature recommends for infants. And yet, the children know they are loved. The show has made this clear across 36 years of episodes, in small moments and in large ones, in the episodes where Homer gets something devastatingly right, and in the episodes where he gets it completely wrong, and in the many episodes where he gets it somewhere in between. The love reaches them. It is real. It does not require the competence to be real. The show has been saying that community is complicated, that the people in a shared space, a neighborhood, a town, a network of people who know each other's names and histories and tendencies, are neither simple sources of support nor simple sources of friction. They are both, simultaneously, in the proportions that any given day makes available. Ned provides support and also drives Homer to the edge. Moe provides the bar and also depletes the occasion. The school provides the institution and also fails the particular child. Springfield is not a good town in the way of fictional communities that are built to demonstrate the goodness of community. It is a real town in the way of real towns, where the goodness and the failure are not distributed according to a moral logic, but simply according to the distribution that happens. It has been saying that intelligence is not the same as wisdom, and that wisdom is not always what it looks like from the outside. Homer's wisdom, when it is present, comes from the body rather than the mind, from the part of him that knows without reasoning where home is and who matters and what the day is for. Lisa's intelligence is real and extraordinary, and has not, by the time the show has explored it most fully, produced a person who is more at peace than Homer. The show is not anti-intellectual. It loves Lisa, but it also suggests, gently, that the capacity to reason clearly about the world does not automatically produce the capacity to inhabit it comfortably. It has been saying that the past shapes people in ways they do not always know. Homer's past, the mother who vanished, the father who covered it with a lie, the crayon that reduced him before he was old enough to protect himself, is not something Homer is aware of as past. He does not have a coherent narrative of his own history. He has a personality that was shaped by that history, carrying the consequences without the explanation. The show has given us the explanation piece by piece across seasons, and what we understand from it, the audience, is more than what Homer understands from it. Homer, and the gap between our understanding and his, is one of the show's most sustained sources of the specific sadness that lives beneath the comedy. It has been saying that the best things in a life are often the simplest: the couch, the beer, the family assembled, the ordinary Tuesday evening. Homer at his most complete is Homer on the couch, with Marge beside him, with the children somewhere in the house doing the things that children do, with the television on and the day completed, and nothing required of him but to be present. The show returns to this image, the family at rest, the house warm, the day done with a fidelity that makes clear it considers this image important, not as a conclusion or a reward or the resolution of something, as the thing itself, the life. This is what the 36 years have been building to. One episode at a time, one couch gag at a time, the patient insistence that the ordinary is enough. That the family on the couch in the house in the town that doesn't appear on any map is, in its imperfect and specific and entirely unremarkable way, exactly what a life should contain. That is what the show has been saying. That is the thing it has never said directly. The Abe Simpson we don't see enough of. Abraham Jebediah Simpson deserves more than a secondary mention in any account of the Simpson family's history. He is, in ways the show does not always make central, the origin point of much of what we have been examining. He is the father who told the lie. Not the only decision that shaped Homer, not the most damaging one, which belongs to Mr. Burns, but the decision that Homer lived inside for 27 years. The one that organized his understanding of himself before he had any other organizing principle available. Homer grew up believing he was unloved by his mother. This belief came from Abe, not from malice, from incapacity, from a man who could not find the words for the truth, and who reached for the available simpler story and gave it to his child, and then had to live with having given it. Abe Simpson is a man who made a bad decision for understandable reasons and then did not find a way back from it, who let the bad decision harden into the architecture of the household and then of Homer's life, who watched his son become the specific kind of man that growing up without a mother and with a father who did not know how to be tender produces, and who carried, quietly, the knowledge that his decision contributed to that becoming. He has not been a good father. The show has been honest about this across the episodes that examine it. He has been present, and he has been absent, simultaneously present in the retirement home, absent from the emotional interior of his son's life in ways that the geographical presence does not resolve. Homer loves Abe with the specific and complicated love of a child for a parent who has disappointed them without being villainous, the love that cannot fully let go, because the letting go would require a clear accounting that Homer, in his fog, cannot fully complete. But Abe has something that the show values, and that the show has given him: stories. The stories are not just comedy. They are the accumulated record of a life. The life of a man who was young in a specific era and who did specific things during that era, who served in a war, who fell in love, who raised children, who worked, who existed as a full person in the world before the retirement castle, and the hearing aid and the perpetual motion of storytelling that nobody wants to listen to. The stories are the evidence that Abe was here, that he mattered, that the years before the show began were not a blank but a life, dense and particular and worthy of the telling. The tragedy of Abe is not that he has stories. It is that he cannot find an audience for them. That the specific form in which meaning is stored in an old man in the anecdote, in the remembered detail, in the connection drawn between what happened then and what is happening now, is precisely the form that the people around him are least equipped to receive. They have their own present. They are busy with it. The old man with the stories is a presence to be managed rather than a resource to be consulted. Bart, who has something in him that is drawn to the underestimated and the overlooked, visits, he sits. He listens imperfectly, but he listens. And Abe, who has been doing this long enough to know the difference between real attention and performed attention, knows the difference. Bart's listening is real. It is half present, and it is distracted, and it will not remember most of the content, but the listening is real. This matters to Abe, more than the content of the stories, more than whether what he is saying is understood. The being listened to. The being, therefore, he will have more stories in the morning, and someone will sit still long enough to receive them. The things Ned Flanders has never said. There is a speech that Ned Flanders has never given. Not because he does not have the words for it. Ned has words for everything. The diddly-doodly neighborino vocabulary of a man who has spent decades finding the softened version of every direct expression. But because the speech would require him to say what he actually thinks, stripped of the softening, and saying what he actually thinks is precisely what the conditioning removed from him before he was old enough to choose. The speech, if it were given, might go something like this. I am tired. I have been trying, for as long as I can remember, as hard as I know how, to be the person that my faith and my upbringing and my own deep convictions say a person should be. I have been generous when generosity was not convenient. I have been patient when patience had run out everywhere else. I have turned the other cheek so many times that the turning has become automatic, has become the reflex rather than the choice, and I am no longer certain whether the turning is genuine virtue or trained response, and I am not sure the distinction matters anymore. I have watched the wrong people receive the rewards that rightness is supposed to produce. I have watched Homer Simpson, who does not try, who does not maintain, who spills and stumbles and forgets and requires management, receive the love and the peace and the family that I have been working toward my entire life. I have watched God speak to Homer and be silent to me, and I have found explanations for this that satisfy the part of me that needs explanation, and the explanations do not satisfy the part of me that is still just a man, still just Ned, standing in his backyard wondering what more he is supposed to do. And I have forgiven all of it, because forgiveness is what I do. Because it is the practice, and the practice is the point, and I believe this even on the days when I can feel the original person underneath the practice pressing against the walls of it. But I am tired. This speech has never been given. It exists in the structure of the character, visible if you know to look for it, confirmed by the hurricane episode and the breakdown in everything the therapist found underneath the cheerfulness. But Ned Flanders has not said it. He waves over the fence. Homer waves back. The morning continues. On the predictions and what they actually reveal. The predictions have become the most discussed aspect of The Simpsons in the era of social media, and they deserve a careful examination before we leave Springfield, not because the predictions are the most important thing about the show, but because they reveal something important about what the show has always been doing. The list is long and widely circulated and contains genuinely remarkable entries. The Trump presidency, anticipated in the year 2000, the Disney acquisition of Fox, the smartwatch, the face-to-face video calling, the particular Cypress Hill and London Symphony Orchestra collaboration that occurred in 2024 exactly as a 1996 episode had joked would occur. The details of certain sporting events, certain technological developments, certain cultural shifts, the internet receives this list as evidence of prophecy, as proof that the show knows something it shouldn't, that the writers have some access to the future that ordinary people do not. And the writers of the show, who are asked about this frequently, provide the honest and less exciting explanation. They are not prophets. They are intelligent, well-educated people who pay very close attention to the present, to the trends in motion, to the trajectories of technology and politics and culture, and who push those trends forward to their logical conclusions, which are often absurd and therefore appropriate for comedy. The Trump episode is the clearest example. The writers observed in 2000 that Trump had been publicly flirting with political ambition for over a decade, that celebrity had become a legitimate pathway to political attention, that the American entertainment industrial complex and the American political industrial complex were converging in ways that made the idea of a celebrity president less absurd with each passing year. They pushed the observation to its logical extreme and wrote a joke. 16 years later, the joke came true. This is not prophecy. This is excellent attention, applied by excellent observers, to the actual direction of the actual world. But there is something else going on with the predictions, something that the show predicts, the future framing misses. The Simpsons is not predicting the future. The Simpsons is shaping it. Not through magic or through some causal mechanism that connects the episode to the event, through culture, through the specific and powerful way that a show this widely watched and this deeply embedded in the American imagination normalizes certain ideas, makes certain futures feel familiar, prepares the cultural ground for certain events to feel, when they arrive, less like shocks and more like inevitabilities. When The Simpsons depicted a Trump presidency in 2000, millions of people saw it. It became a reference point. It circulated. It entered the cultural bloodstream in a way that made the idea the abstract, satirical, absurdist idea of Trump becoming president present in American consciousness years before it happened. Not as a desirable thing, not as a thing being advocated for, as a thing that had been imagined, that had been named, that had become part of the landscape of possible futures that Americans carried in their heads. When Trump announced his candidacy in 2015, for a significant portion of the population, the announcement did not feel like a shocking impossibility. It felt like a punchline that had finally arrived. The Simpsons already did this. We've seen this before. The show didn't predict the future. The show made the future feel familiar. And when the future arrived, the familiarity felt like prophecy. This is the actual mechanism, and it is more interesting than prophecy. Prophecy suggests that someone saw what was coming from outside the causal chain. What The Simpsons did is participate in the causal chain, contribute to the cultural conditions that made certain futures possible. Certain futures feel inevitable. Certain futures arrive with a sense of recognition rather than shock. Springfield doesn't reflect America. America has been becoming Springfield, the nuclear plant run by an ancient billionaire, the town that keeps the lights on rather than asking where the lights come from, the safety inspector who sleeps at his desk because asking him to do the job properly would require someone to pay for it. The people who forget each catastrophe by the next episode because the alternative is to remember them all simultaneously, and no one can live that way. These are not predictions of a possible America. They are observations of an existing one, given the specific form that animation and comedy make possible, exaggerated enough to be funny, accurate enough to sting, persistent enough across 36 years to have become part of the background of American self-understanding. The show has been our mirror for 3.5 decades. We stared into it long enough that we started to resemble what we saw, and then we called what we saw prediction. What remains? Everything we have examined: the characters, the town, the theories, the history, the predictions, the secondary world of Springfield and its accumulated cast of flawed and specific and entirely recognizable people. All of it has been in service of a single question that the show has been posing, in different forms, since December of 1989. What makes a life? Not what makes a great life, or a successful life, or a life that the culture agrees is worth admiring. What makes a life, in the ordinary sense, what holds it together, what gives it weight, what makes the days mean something to the person living them? The Simpsons' answer has been consistent across every episode and every season and every iteration of what the show is and has been. What makes a life is the people in it and the daily choosing of them. The people you return to, the place you call home. The love that persists not because it is perfect, but because it keeps choosing to persist. This is not a profound answer. It is not an original one. It is, in fact, one of the oldest answers to the question of what makes a life, so old that it has the quality of something that has been true for so long that it occasionally stops feeling like a discovery and starts feeling like furniture. The Simpsons keeps it feeling like a discovery, because every time Homer comes through the door of the house on Evergreen Terrace, every time the episode ends with the family intact and the couch occupied and the television on and the ordinary evening resuming, it is a discovery. The discovery that the ordinary is not nothing, that the house where the same people live out the same imperfect lives season after season is not a failure of ambition but the whole point, that coming home is not a consolation prize but the destination. Every episode, every couch gag. Every time Homer says his son's name and his son rolls his eyes and the camera holds on the living room for a moment before the credits roll, the discovery, the ordinary is enough. Come home. It is waiting for you. On Watching Alone at Night, there is a particular experience of watching television late at night, alone, when the day is over and the house is quiet and the screen is the only light in the room. It is a different experience from watching in the daytime, from watching with other people, from watching as a deliberate social activity with conversation around the edges. It is the watching you do when you need something that you are not quite ready to articulate, when the silence of the house is a different kind of silence from the productive or the peaceful kind, when what you need is the specific thing that a screen in the dark provides, the sensation of another world, running alongside yours, inhabited by people who are going about their business whether you are watching them or not. Springfield runs whether you are watching or not. This is the fiction that television creates and that The Simpsons has sustained more consistently than perhaps any other show in the medium's history. The sense that what you are watching was already happening before you tuned in and will continue after you turn it off, that Homer is on that couch, in some sense, at all hours, that Marge is in the kitchen, or will be in the morning, that Bart is scheming and Lisa is practicing and Maggie is watching, and the show is simply the window you open onto their lives rather than the source of the lives themselves. This fiction is more comforting than it has any right to be, especially late at night, especially alone, especially when the day has been the kind of day that makes you reach for something familiar, for the specific comfort of the thing that has been there before and is still here now and will be here in the next episode and the next season and the indefinite future, running its familiar course through its familiar world, unchanged. Homer is on the couch. He has always been on the couch. The couch holds him the way the couch holds everything that matters to him, without judgment, without demand, with the simple structural fact of being there and being solid enough to be sat on. When you watch late at night, alone, you bring yourself to the screen with an openness that the daytime and the social and the deliberate watching do not always allow. The guard is down. The performance of watching, of being the kind of person who watches things for specific reasons and can articulate those reasons, has been set aside. You are just watching. You are just there, in the dark, with the yellow family, in the warm light of the television. They do not know you are there. They are going about their business, the business of being the Simpsons, which is the business of loving each other imperfectly and getting things wrong and finding their way home. But you are there. And the watching, late at night, alone, is its own form of company, its own form of not being entirely alone in the hour. Springfield accommodates this. Springfield has always accommodated this. The town that doesn't appear on any map is available whenever you need it. The house on Evergreen Terrace keeps the light on. The couch has room. Come in. Sit down. Let the episode begin. You don't have to say why you're here. They're just glad you came. One final thing. Before this ends, before the last section settles and the night takes over, one final thing. The show has been making, quietly and persistently across 36 seasons, an argument about what deserves to be taken seriously. Not an explicit argument. Not an argument stated in text or advanced through characters who speak on the show's behalf. An argument made through the act of continuing to be what it is, year after year, episode after episode. The argument is this: the life of a nuclear plant worker and his wife and their 3 children in a fictional town in an unspecified state, a life of financial precarity and domestic chaos and imperfect love and the occasional radioactive fish. This life deserves to be taken seriously, to be represented with honesty and affection, to be examined with the same attention that literary culture gives to the lives of people with more conventional claims to significance. Homer Simpson does not have conventional claims to significance. He has not built anything, achieved anything, contributed anything to the march of human progress in any way that could be cited at a conference or commemorated with a plaque. He has, by the conventional measures, wasted his time on a couch with a beer and a television. And the show says, look again. Look more carefully. Look past the measures that are easy to apply and that therefore get applied everywhere, past the metrics of accomplishment and productivity and advancement, past the story that American culture tells about what a life is supposed to amount to. Look at what Homer actually has. A woman who has stayed. Children who know they are loved. A place that is his. A house that holds his shape in the couch. A street where people know his name. Friends who will be at the bar when he gets there. Days that start and end in the same place. A life that, by the measures that actually matter to the people living it, is full. This is what the show has been arguing for 36 years. This is the argument it has won. We come back every Sunday. We have been coming back for 36 years. We bring our whole selves to the yellow family on the orange couch, and what we find there every time is confirmation. The ordinary is enough. The life is enough. The family, imperfect and warm and entirely present, is enough. Homer comes home. That is the whole story. That has always been the whole story. The final walk down Evergreen Terrace. Let us go back one more time. Not to the characters or the theories or the arguments, just to the street. Evergreen Terrace. The specific block. The houses in their rows. The white fence between Homer's and Ned's, with the damage from the lawnmower incident and the car incident, and the incident that the show depicts and then never fully explains. The trees on the street, not quite right botanically, the shade they provide not quite consistent with the geography of wherever Springfield actually is, because the shade is there because the street needs shade, because the visual warmth of the street requires it, because this is the kind of neighborhood where children ride bikes and adults mow lawns, and the evenings have a particular quality of settled light that seems to arrive earlier here than in most fictional places. It is morning on Evergreen Terrace. Homer has left for work or has not left yet, or has left and returned because he forgot something, which is a statistically likely outcome. The car is in the driveway or it is not, depending on which version of the morning this is. The garage door has seen better years. Marge is in the kitchen, the coffee is on. The day is beginning its particular sequence of requirements, and Marge is already a few steps ahead of it, has already anticipated some of what the day will need, and has begun assembling the response. The hum is present. The single note that means she is thinking. That means the day is already being managed even in its earliest minutes. Bart is asleep, or is pretending to be asleep, which amounts to the same thing at this hour. The skateboard is leaning against the wall. The ceiling above him has not changed. He will leave for school. When leaving for school can no longer be avoided, and not 1 second before, Lisa is up. Lisa is always up, has always been up. The mornings in the Simpson household belonging to her in the specific way that the early hours belong to people who have interior lives that don't switch off easily, and therefore switch on again before the world requires it. She might be reading. She might be at her desk, working on something. The saxophone is in its case. The morning is not the time for the saxophone. The morning is the time for the work, for the things that have to get done before the day begins making its demands. The saxophone is for later, for the specific later that belongs to her. And Maggie, still small, still present, still watching from wherever she is in the morning in her crib, or carried, or installed in the high chair in the kitchen where the morning activity is visible from the best possible angle, still taking it all in, still carrying in the quiet behind the pacifier everything she has not yet decided to say. The house on Evergreen Terrace is not a remarkable house. It is a yellow house, slightly too small for everyone in it, with a lawn that Homer maintains imperfectly, and a kitchen that Marge maintains with precision, and a living room that the orange couch defines, and a life happening in it that is specific and ordinary and entirely, stubbornly real. The street outside is quiet at this hour. A dog walks. A neighbor waves from a driveway. The power plant is visible on the skyline. The cooling towers exhaling. The sky over Springfield is the particular shade of blue that only exists in animation, that is not quite the blue of any real sky, but that is more consistently blue than any real sky ever manages, a blue that has been the background to 36 years of episodes, and that has therefore become, for many people, the blue that means Springfield, the blue that means Sunday evenings, the blue that means the theme song is about to play, and the episode is about to begin. The theme song plays. The episode begins, and Homer comes through the door. He always does. He always will. The couch receives him. The television is on. The family assembles. The evening does what evenings in Springfield do. It is what it is, and what it is includes the comedy and the disaster and the recovery and the ordinary sitting together that comes after, the quiet that descends when the crisis has resolved and the family is in the same room, and nothing is required of any of them except to be in the same room together. That is the evening. That is every evening. That is what the show has been making, one episode at a time, for 36 years. A home that anyone can enter, that the channel creates, that the couch gag announces and the theme song welcomes and the family populates, episode after episode, season after season, as long as anyone is watching. As long as you are watching, which, if you are here at this hour, listening to this story about a yellow family in a town that doesn't appear on any map you are watching. You are in Springfield. You are home. Close your eyes now. The town will be here when you wake up. The family will be on the couch. The light will be on in the kitchen. Homer will come through the door. He always does. A last word on the characters we love. Before the darkness fully settles, one more pass through the people we have spent this time with. Not a summary, not a conclusion. Just a last look, the way you take a last look at a place you are leaving and know you will return to. Homer is asleep. He sleeps with the specific completeness of someone whose relationship with consciousness is uncomplicated. He is awake when he is awake, and asleep when he is asleep, and the transition between the two states does not require the long negotiation that anxious people know. His dreams, if the coma theory is true, are everything we have been watching. If it is not true, his dreams are probably simpler. Donuts, most likely, Marge, the couch, the particular pleasure of a day that asks nothing of him. Marge has set the coffee maker for morning. This is her last act before bed on most nights, the anticipation of the next day's first requirement, the small gesture of future care that characterizes her. Tomorrow's morning will be easier by 30 seconds because she did this tonight. She will not think of this as meaningful. It is simply what she does, what she has always done. The 30 seconds matter. She knows this without saying it. Bart is dreaming about something that involves speed. The skateboard, possibly, or the chase, or the specific sensation of moving faster than the things behind you. His sleeping face is the face of a child. Stripped of the performance, undefended in the dark, he is 10 years old. He has always been 10 years old. In the morning he will be the Bart he performs again, the rebellion and the smirk and the act. For now he is just a boy, sleeping in his room, surrounded by the evidence of his particular enthusiasms. Lisa's saxophone is in its case. She will play it tomorrow. In the evening, probably, when the day's requirements are complete and the space opens up that the saxophone fills. She knows this without planning it. The playing is not scheduled. It simply happens, the way necessary things happen to people who have made space for them. The music will come from the window. Someone on the street might hear it. They will probably not stop to listen. That's all right. Lisa plays because Lisa needs to play, not because anyone is listening. And Maggie, in the dark. Still watching, even now, even in sleep, with some portion of her processing the day's intake, filing the observations, adding them to the archive that is building behind the pacifier into something vast and patient and waiting. The butterfly from the daycare film is somewhere in there. Homer's face. The feeling of the house at night, quiet in the way that houses are quiet when the people in them are finally at rest. She is 1 year old. She has always been 1 year old. She will be 1 year old as long as the show runs, and perhaps longer in the memory of everyone who has watched her watch everything. She will remain exactly this, exactly present, exactly waiting. The house breathes, the street is still. The town of Springfield, which does not appear on any map, which is everywhere and nowhere and always available, settles into its overnight state and rests. It will be here in the morning. It has always been here. Whatever time it is where you are, whatever you brought with you tonight to this particular story about this particular town, you are allowed to rest now too. The Simpsons will be here when you wake up. They always are. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. A note on how to listen. If you have made it this far, if you have traveled through Homer's fog and Marge's pearls, and Bart's skateboard, and Lisa's saxophone, and Maggie's watching, and Mr. Burns's cracked cooling towers and Ned's practiced cheerfulness, and Smithers's patient love and Sideshow Bob's magnificent resentment, and Krusty's painted grief, and Wiggum's accidental wisdom, and Mona's terrible absence and Springfield's impossible geography, and all the secondary people who fill the town's corners, then you have spent a long time in a place that doesn't exist, and that time was not wasted. This is worth saying because the culture has opinions about the watching of television, and the listening to stories about television that sometimes suggest the time spent is recreational in a way that implies lesser that it is the time after the real work, the relaxation that earns the right to more real work. That the story about a cartoon family is the dessert and not the meal. The Simpsons has been making the opposite argument for 36 years, and the argument is correct. The story is the meal. The time spent in Springfield is not the break from life, but a different form of engagement with it, a way of thinking about the things that matter through the specific distance that fiction provides. The safety of the yellow skin and the four fingers and the floating timeline that allows you to approach the real things. the love and the loss and the ordinary and the extraordinary, at an angle that the direct approach does not always make available. The time you spend in Springfield is time spent thinking about family, about what it means to love people who are not always easy to love, about what it means to stay, about what it means to come home, again and again, to the same place and the same people and the same orange couch, and to find that the returning is not diminishment, but accumulation, that each return adds to rather than subtracts from what the place means. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, a great deal. The show has given us permission for 36 years to care about these things, to take them seriously, to treat the ordinary evening and the family assembled and the couch that holds everyone as worthy of attention, worthy of an hour a week for 36 years, worthy of the kind of careful looking that we reserve, usually, for things we have decided are important. The ordinary is important. The Simpsons has been insisting on this since 1989. It has not stopped insisting. It will keep insisting, and we will keep coming back, because the insisting is correct, and somewhere in us we have always known it, and the show gives us a place to rest in the knowledge every Sunday night. So, listen slowly. Breathe. Let the words arrive at the pace that sleep requires. Let Springfield settle around you like the familiar thing it has always been. Let the family be where they are, and let yourself be where you are, and let the two places coexist in the specific way that fiction and life coexist when fiction is doing its job. Homer is on the couch. Marge is nearby. The children are somewhere in the house. The light is on. You are here. That is enough. That has always been enough. The show goes on. There will be another episode. There is always another episode. The show has been producing another episode reliably for 36 years through cast changes and writer changes and cultural shifts and the general transformation of the media landscape in ways that should have made a show like The Simpsons impossible to sustain, and it has continued. The couch gag will be different from the one before it. The plot of the episode will be new. The specific disaster and its specific resolution will not have happened before, but the family will be the same. The town will be the same. The quality of the light in the kitchen and the warmth of the lamp in the living room and the weight of the couch under the family's combined mass, these will be the same. This continuity is not an accident. It is the show's most deliberate commitment, renewed with every episode, the decision to keep the constants constant so that the variables can vary without the whole structure becoming unrecognizable. The show can go anywhere, space, other countries, other centuries, the depths of Homer's dream, as long as it comes back to the couch. As long as it comes back to the family, as long as Homer comes through the door. He always comes through the door. The credits roll. The couch gag plays. And in a house, on a street, in a town that is everywhere and nowhere, a family sits down together and the evening begins. This has been happening since December of 1989. It will happen again next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, for as long as we keep watching, for as long as the loop keeps running. For as long as we need the family to be there, on the couch, in the house, unchanged, in the town that holds everything we bring to it. Springfield is waiting. It always will be. Close your eyes. The thing about Springfield is that it was never just a show. It was a habit, a ritual, a point of return that the weeks built themselves around. The way certain rooms in a house become the room where everything important happens, not because the room is extraordinary, but because enough has happened in it. Enough time has been spent there. Enough returns have been made to it that the room has accumulated the weight of all of those moments and wears it in the way old rooms wear history, quietly and in the walls. Sunday nights, 8 o'clock. The family on the couch. The episode. This has been the ritual. Yours and everyone's. The specific Sunday night gravity of it. The way the week bent toward it and the week after it bent away from it and the next week bent back. The cycle running without interruption through seasons and years, and the full passage of 3.5 decades. The ritual holds. The family holds. Homer holds Maggie, and Maggie holds everything she has not yet said, and Lisa holds the saxophone, and Bart holds the act, and Marge holds all of them, and the house holds Marge, and Springfield holds the house, and somewhere, on a couch, in the warm light of a television, you are being held too. You have always been held here. That is what the show is for. Sleep now. The orange couch is still there. It will always be there. It has Homer's shape in the middle cushion and the warmth of 36 years in the fabric, and the specific gravity of a piece of furniture that has become more than furniture, that has become the place where the story lives. Go there when you need to, it is always open. Springfield does not exist anywhere on any map, and it exists everywhere that stories exist, which means it exists in every house and every apartment and every room where someone has turned off the overhead light and turned on the television and let the yellow family in. They come in, they sit down, the couch holds, the show goes on. So do you. Sleep. The family is there. They are always there. On the couch, in the house, on the street, in the town, warm and imperfect and entirely stubbornly yours. Good night. And Homer comes home. He has always come home. He will come home in the next episode and the one after that, every Sunday night, through every season still to come. The door opens, the family is there, the couch holds, the evening begins. This is Springfield. This is the show. This is the thing that was there when you needed something familiar, and that will be there the next time you need it and the time after that. It does not ask anything of you except your presence. You are present. You are here. The loop keeps running. Good night.